A former businessman with Alzheimer or TMS tries to rebuild his simple life when he is surprised by a little beggar girl. "I know where your money is." Driven by curiosity and desperation, he follows the girl, discovering that she holds information that could change everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of corporate boardrooms that once defined Thomas Hartley's life. As he kneaded dough with calloused hands, memories of his former glory flickered like a faulty light bulb in his mind. Just a year ago, he had been the toast of Silicon Valley, a tech mogul whose name was synonymous with innovation and success. Now, at 55, he found himself the humble owner of a modest bakery in the suburbs of San Francisco. The transition from tech titan to small business owner was not one Thomas had ever envisioned for himself. His company, Neuralink, had been on the cusp of revolutionizing brain-computer interfaces. Investors had been clamoring to get a piece of what promised to be the next big thing in tech. Thomas had been riding high, his face gracing the covers of business magazines, his words dissected by eager entrepreneurs looking to emulate his success. But success, as Thomas had learned the hard way, was a fickle friend. It had taken just one board meeting, one betrayal, to bring his empire crashing down. His trusted partners, men and women he had considered family, had orchestrated a coup so swift and ruthless that Thomas still struggled to comprehend it fully. In a matter of hours, he had gone from CEO to outcast, his shares diluted, his patents reassigned, his legacy erased. As he shaped the dough into loaves, Thomas tried to focus on the task at hand, but his mind wandered. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was forgetting something important. These lapses in memory had become more frequent lately, a fact that terrified him more than he cared to admit. At first, he had attributed it to stress, to the trauma of losing everything, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. The doctor's words echoed in his head. Early onset Alzheimer's. The diagnosis had come just weeks after his professional downfall, a cruel 1-2 punch from fate. Thomas had always prided himself on his sharp mind, his ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. Now that brilliant mind was betraying him, unraveling like a poorly written code. The bell above the bakery door chimed, snapping Thomas back to the present. A middle-aged woman entered, her eyes scanning the displays of bread and pastries. "Good afternoon," Thomas greeted, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What can I get for you today?" The woman ordered a loaf of sourdough, and as Thomas wrapped it up, he couldn't help but wonder if she knew who he was. Did she see the fallen tech mogul, or just another small-town baker? The anonymity was both a blessing and a curse. Here he wasn't Thomas Hartley, the man who lost it all. He was just Tom, the guy who made pretty decent bread. As the woman left, Thomas glanced at the clock. Nearly closing time. He began the process of shutting down the bakery, wiping counters and tallying the day's meager earnings. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. That's what he told himself every night as he locked up, trying to find solace in the simplicity of his new life. Just as he was about to turn the sign to closed, a small figure appeared at the door. A little girl, no more than 8 or 9, peered in through the glass. Her clothes were worn, her feet bare and dirty. Thomas hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gentler than he intended. The girl looked up at him with wide, hungry eyes. "Please, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you have any bread you could spare?" Thomas felt a pang in his chest. Not too long ago, he wouldn't have thought twice about dropping thousands of dollars on a single meal. Now he understood the value of a simple loaf of bread. Without hesitation, he reached for a fresh baguette and handed it to the girl. "Here you go," he said, offering a genuine smile. "Be careful out there, okay?" The girl's face lit up as she clutched the bread to her chest. "Thank you, sir. God bless you." And with that she was gone, disappearing into the gathering twilight. As Thomas locked up the bakery and began his walk home, his mind kept drifting back to the little girl. In his old life, he might not have even noticed her. Now, her gratitude for something as simple as bread stuck with him, a reminder of how much his perspective had changed. The streets grew darker as Thomas walked, the familiar route suddenly seeming strange and confusing. He blinked, trying to orient himself. For a moment he was sure he should be heading towards his old mansion in the hills. But that wasn't right, was it? He lived in a small apartment now, above a laundromat. Or did he? Panic began to set in as Thomas realized he couldn't remember where he was supposed to go. The streets all looked the same, the landmarks unfamiliar. He wandered, his heart racing, trying to make sense of his surroundings. In his mind, he was still the successful CEO, trying to find his way back to a life that no longer existed. Hours passed, though Thomas had lost all sense of time. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon when he finally collapsed onto a park bench, exhausted and disoriented. As he sat there, head in his hands, he heard a small voice. "Mister, are you okay?" Thomas looked up, his vision blurry with unshed tears. Standing before him was the little girl from the bakery, her eyes wide with concern. For a moment he didn't recognize her. Then, like a lifeline in a stormy sea, recognition dawned. You're the girl from the bakery," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. The girl nodded, a tentative smile on her face. "I'm Isa," she said. Then, leaning in close as if sharing a great secret, she added, "And I think I know where your money is." Thomas stared at her, uncomprehending. His money? What was she talking about? But before he could ask, Isa grabbed his hand, tugging him to his feet. "Come on," she said, her voice filled with an urgency that cut through Thomas's confusion. "I have something to show you, something that might change everything." As Thomas allowed himself to be led by this strange, determined little girl, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to take yet another unexpected turn. For better or worse, only time would tell. Thomas stumbled after Isa, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. The little girl's hand, small but surprisingly strong, pulled him through the awakening streets of the suburb. The early morning light cast long shadows, transforming the familiar neighborhood into a landscape of mystery. "Slow down," Thomas panted, his legs still wobbly from his night of aimless wandering. "Where are we going?" Isa glanced back at him, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and worry. "Somewhere safe," she replied cryptically. "We can't talk here. There are too many ears." Her words sent a chill down Thomas's spine. What did this child know? And why did she speak as if they were being watched? He wanted to question her further, but something in her demeanor stopped him. There was a seriousness to Isa that seemed out of place in one so young. After what felt like an eternity of twists and turns, through back alleys and quiet streets, Isa finally slowed her pace. They had arrived at a small, run-down park, tucked away between two apartment buildings. The swings creaked in the morning breeze, and the slide was covered in a fine layer of rust. It was the kind of place that time and the city's budget had forgotten. Isa led Thomas to a secluded bench partially hidden by overgrown bushes. As they sat down, Thomas noticed for the first time how tired the girl looked. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes, though clean, were worn and ill-fitting. "Okay," Thomas said gently. "We're here. Now, can you tell me what this is all about? You said something about my money?" Isa nodded, her small face scrunching up in concentration. I stay with my stepdad," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not a nice man. He doesn't really take care of me. I have to find food on my own most days." Thomas felt a surge of anger at the thought of this child being neglected. He wanted to interrupt, to ask why she wasn't in school, why social services hadn't intervened. But he held his tongue, sensing that Isa needed to tell her story at her own pace. "Anyway," Isa continued, "a few days ago I was hiding in the closet. I do that sometimes when he gets mad. And I found some papers, important-looking papers with big words I didn't understand. But I saw your picture, Mr. Hartley. It was you, but you looked different. Younger, I think. And there were numbers. Lots of numbers." Thomas's heart began to race. Could it be possible? Had this child stumbled upon evidence of the fraud that had cost him everything? "Isa," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "this is very important. Do you remember any of the words on those papers? Or the names of any other people in the pictures?" Isa's brow furrowed in concentration. "There was one name I remember. It sounded funny. Neurolink." Thomas gasped. Isa's eyes lit up. That's it. Neuralink. It was all over the papers. Thomas felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath him. Neuralink. His company. His creation. His legacy. The company that had been stolen from him through corporate subterfuge and betrayal. And somehow, impossibly, this little girl had stumbled upon what could be the key to unraveling it all. "Issa," Thomas said, his voice shaking, "I need to see those papers. Do you think you could show them to me?" The girl's face fell. I don't know. My stepdad, he gets really angry when anyone touches his stuff, and he's been acting weird lately, like he's scared of something, or someone." Thomas's mind raced. He knew he should be cautious, knew that involving a child in what could be a dangerous situation was wrong, but the possibility of reclaiming his life, of exposing the truth, was too tempting to ignore. "Listen to me, Issa," he said, leaning in close. "What your stepdad is doing, keeping you from school, not taking care of you, that's wrong. It's against the law. If we can get those papers, we might be able to help you too. But I promise you, I won't let anything bad happen to you, okay?" Issa looked at him for a long moment, her young face etched with an old soul's wisdom. Finally, she nodded. "It's okay, Mr. Hartley, I trust you, but we have to be careful. My stepdad, he has friends, scary friends." As they sat there on that forgotten bench, an unlikely alliance was forged between the fallen tech mogul and the neglected little girl. Neither of them could have predicted the twists and turns their journey would take, the dangers they would face, or the bonds they would form. Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose coursing through him. For the first time since his world had come crashing down, he had hope. But with that hope came fear. Fear for Issa's safety, fear of what he might uncover, and fear of his own mind's betrayal as his memories continued to slip away. As they left the park, planning their next move, Thomas made a silent vow. No matter what happened, he would protect this brave little girl who had given him a chance at redemption. And together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting away the last shadows of dawn. For Thomas and Issa, it felt like the beginning of a new day in more ways than one. They walked side by side, an unlikely pair united by circumstance and a shared hope for justice. Little did they know that their every move was being watched by unseen eyes, and that their quest for truth would shake the foundations of power in ways they could never have imagined. The following days unfolded like a surreal dream for Thomas. By day, he continued his routine at the bakery, kneading dough and serving customers with a smile that belied the turmoil within. But his mind was elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of the mysterious documents Issa had mentioned and the possibility of reclaiming his lost life. Every evening after closing the bakery, Thomas would meet Issa in the forgotten park. They would sit on their bench, hidden from prying eyes, and plan their next move. The girl's street smarts and Thomas's business acumen made for an unlikely but effective team. "My stepdad usually goes out on Friday nights," Issa explained one evening, her small fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. "He doesn't come back until really late. Sometimes not until morning." Thomas nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "That could be our chance," he mused. "But Issa, I need you to understand how dangerous this could be. If your stepdad catches us..." Issa's eyes hardened, a look that no child should ever have. "He won't," she said with certainty. "I know how to be quiet, how to be invisible." The words broke Thomas's heart. He reached out, gently squeezing Issa's shoulder. "You shouldn't have to be invisible, Issa. No child should." For a moment, Issa's tough exterior cracked, and Thomas saw the vulnerable little girl beneath. She quickly wiped her eyes, but not before Thomas caught a glimpse of the tears she was trying to hide. As they finalized their plans for Friday night, Thomas couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. He was putting so much faith in the word of a child he barely knew. What if this was all a misunderstanding? What if the documents weren't what Issa thought they were? But then he remembered the look in Issa's eyes when she spoke of her stepfather, the fear and determination that no child should have to carry. Even if the documents turned out to be nothing, Thomas knew he couldn't turn his back on Issa now. Friday arrived with agonizing slowness. Thomas went through the motions at the bakery, his hands working on autopilot, while his mind raced with possibilities and fears. As he served the last customer of the day, he noticed a man lingering outside the shop, watching him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. The man was tall and lean, with sharp features and cold eyes. He wore a well-tailored suit that seemed out of place in the modest neighborhood. For a split second, Thomas thought he recognized him, but the memory slipped away like water through his fingers. By the time Thomas had locked up and turned around, the man was gone. Had he imagined it? Was his paranoia getting the best of him? Shaking off his unease, Thomas made his way to the meeting spot. Isa was already there, pacing nervously. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked gently. Isa nodded, her face set with determination. "He left an hour ago. We should have plenty of time." As they walked towards Isa's house, Thomas felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The streets seemed familiar in a way they shouldn't, given that he had only been in this neighborhood for a few months. Another memory teased at the edges of his mind, but like so many others lately, it remained frustratingly out of reach. Isa's home was a small, dilapidated house at the end of a quiet street. Paint peeled from the walls, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds. Thomas's heart ached at the thought of Isa living in such conditions. With practiced ease, Isa led them to a side window, partially hidden by an overgrown bush. "I can unlock it from the inside," she whispered, squeezing through a gap that seemed impossibly small for even her tiny frame. Moments later, Thomas heard a soft click and the window swung open. He climbed in, finding himself in a cluttered living room. The air was stale, tinged with the smell of cigarettes and neglect. "This way," Isa urged, leading him down a narrow hallway. They entered what appeared to be a home office, though organized chaos would have been a generous description. Papers were strewn across every surface and empty bottles littered the floor. "The papers I saw are in here somewhere," Isa said, her voice barely above a whisper, "in a folder with a weird symbol on it." Thomas nodded, his heart pounding. They began to search, careful not to disturb anything too much. Minutes ticked by, each second increasing the risk of discovery. Just as Thomas was about to suggest they give up, Isa let out a small gasp. "Found it!" she exclaimed, pulling a thick folder from beneath a stack of magazines. Thomas's hands shook as he took the folder from Isa. On the cover was a symbol he knew all too well, the Neuralink logo he had designed himself, what felt like a lifetime ago. With bated breath, he opened the folder, Inside were documents, financial reports, and emails, a paper trail that told a story of betrayal and fraud on a massive scale. Thomas's eyes widened as he scanned the contents, memories flooding back with each page he turned. "My God," he whispered, his voice a mix of shock and vindication. "This is it, Isa. This is everything." But before Isa could respond, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold, the front door opening, followed by heavy footsteps. "He's back," Isa whispered, her face pale with fear. "We have to hide." In a panic, Thomas shoved the documents back into the folder. They looked around frantically for an escape route, but the footsteps were getting closer. The doorknob to the office began to turn. In that moment, as fear threatened to overwhelm him, Thomas made a split-second decision. He would not let Isa suffer for his quest. With surprising strength, he lifted Isa and helped her out the window they had entered through. "Run," he whispered urgently. "I'll distract him. Go to the bakery and wait for me." Isa hesitated for a moment, torn between fear for herself and concern for Thomas. But another sound from the hallway spurred her into action. With one last desperate look, she disappeared into the night. Thomas turned to face the door, the incriminating folder clutched to his chest. As the door swung open, he found himself face to face with a man he recognized from his past, a face he had hoped never to see again. "Well, well," the man said, his voice dripping with malice. "Thomas Hartley. Fancy meeting you here." In that moment, as his past and present collided, Thomas realized that his journey to reclaim his life had just become far more complicated and dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Thomas stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced the man from his past. Recognition dawned slowly, fighting through the fog of his failing memory. This was Victor Reeves, once his trusted CFO at Neuralink, now standing before him with a look of calculated menace. "Victor," Thomas managed to say, his voice steadier than he felt. "What are you doing here?" Victor's lips curled into a cold smile. I think the better question is, what are you doing here, Thomas? Breaking and entering doesn't seem like your style. Then again, neither does running a quaint little bakery. Thomas's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation. He needed to protect Isa, to keep her out of this. I got confused, he said, leaning into the vulnerability of his condition. Sometimes I forget where I am, what year it is. I thought this was my old office. A flicker of something. Pity, amusement, crossed Victor's face. Oh, Thomas, how the mighty have fallen. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The great Thomas Hartley reduced to a doddering old fool. Anger flared in Thomas's chest, momentarily cutting through his fear. What happened, Victor? We were friends once. We built Neuralink together. Why did you betray me? Victor's amusement faded, replaced by a hard, cold look. Business, Thomas. It was always about business. You were too focused on changing the world, on your grand visions. You forgot that at the end of the day, it's all about profit. We simply redirected the company towards more lucrative ventures. Lucrative or illegal? Thomas countered, emboldened by the righteous anger coursing through him. He clutched the folder tighter to his chest, knowing it contained the evidence of their misdeeds. Victor's eyes narrowed, focusing on the folder for the first time. What do you have there, Thomas? Something you'd like to share with the class? Thomas took a step back, his mind working furiously. He needed to get out of here, to get these documents to someone who could help. But Victor was blocking the only exit, and Thomas knew he was no match for the younger man physically. It's nothing, Thomas lied, trying to keep his voice casual. Just some old recipes I've been working on. You know how it is, always trying to improve. Victor took a step forward, his hand outstretched. Why don't you let me take a look? For old time's sake. Thomas felt panic rising in his throat. He glanced around the room, looking for anything that might help him. His eyes fell on a heavy paperweight on the cluttered desk. In a moment of desperation, he grabbed it and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered with a thunderous crash, startling Victor. Thomas seized the moment of distraction to push past him, clutching the folder to his chest as he ran down the hallway. He could hear Victor's angry shouts behind him, spurring him to run faster than he had in years. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, temporarily pushing back the fog of confusion that had plagued him for months. Thomas burst out of the front door and into the night, his lungs burning as he gulped in the cool air. He ran without direction, driven by pure instinct and the need to get as far away from Victor as possible. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Thomas finally slowed, his body unable to keep up the frantic pace. He found himself in a small alley, hidden from the main street. Leaning against a wall, he tried to catch his breath and gather his thoughts. The folder. He still had the folder. Thomas looked down at it, realizing for the first time that his hands were shaking. Inside this unassuming manila envelope was the key to reclaiming his life, to exposing the truth about what had happened at Neuralink, but at what cost? Victor knew he had the documents now. He would be coming for them, for Thomas. And what about Isa? Had she made it safely to the bakery? The thought of the brave little girl filled Thomas with a mix of worry and resolve. He couldn't go back to the bakery, not yet. It would be the first place Victor would look. Thomas needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere he could examine the documents and figure out his next move. As he stood there trying to decide what to do, a memory surfaced, clear and vivid in a way his recollections rarely were these days. It was of a conversation he'd had years ago with his old friend and mentor, Dr. Eleanor Chen. She had been there at the beginning of Neuralink, had believed in Thomas's vision when few others did. If you ever need a safe haven, she had told him once, come to the old boathouse by Willow Creek. No one goes there anymore, but I keep it maintained. The key is under the blue flower pot. Thomas clung to this memory like a lifeline. The boathouse. He could go there, regroup, and figure out what to do next. But first he needed to make sure Isa was safe. Cautiously, Thomas made his way out of the alley. He found a payphone, a rarity these days, but a blessing for someone trying to avoid being traced. With shaking fingers, he dialed the number for his bakery. After several rings, a small, frightened voice answered. "Hello? Isa," Thomas breathed, relief washing over him. "Thank goodness you're safe." "Mr. Hartley," Isa exclaimed. "I was so worried. Are you okay? Did that man hurt you?" "I'm fine, Issa," Thomas assured her, even as he winced at the aches in his body from his frantic escape. "Listen to me carefully. I need you to lock all the doors and stay inside the bakery. Don't open the door for anyone, not even me, until you hear the secret knock we practiced, okay?" "Okay," Issa said, her voice small but determined. "What are you going to do?" Thomas paused, weighing his words carefully. "I'm going to find a safe place to look at those documents. Once I know more, I'll come back for you. I promise." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Issa spoke again, her voice stronger now. "Be careful, Mr. Hartley. I need you to come back." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "I will, Issa, I promise. You be careful too. Remember, trust no one." After hanging up, Thomas took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead, the boathouse by Willow Creek. It wasn't far, but getting there undetected would be a challenge. As he set off into the night, the weight of the folder heavy in his arms, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something much bigger and more dangerous than he had initially realized. But he also felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since his world had fallen apart, Thomas Hartley had a clear goal. He would uncover the truth, clear his name, and make sure Issa had the safe, happy life she deserved. No matter what it took, no matter who stood in his way, he would see this through to the end. The city streets stretched out before him, a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Somewhere in the darkness, Victor was searching for him, and beyond that, the truth waited to be uncovered. With each step, Thomas moved closer to reclaiming his past and, perhaps, securing a future he never expected. The night air was thick with fog as Thomas made his way towards Willow Creek. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every distant sound making him flinch. The folder containing the damning documents was clutched tightly to his chest, a lifeline to the truth he desperately sought. As he approached the creek, memories began to surface. He and Eleanor had spent countless hours here in the early days of Neuralink, discussing their dreams and aspirations. The boathouse had been their refuge, a place where ideas flowed as freely as the water beside it. Thomas found the structure exactly where he remembered it, a weathered wooden building that had seen better days. True to Eleanor's word, a faded blue flower pot sat beside the door. With trembling hands he lifted it, relief washing over him as he found the key exactly where it should be. The lock turned with a rusty groan, and Thomas slipped inside, closing the door behind him. The interior was musty but clean, illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the windows. Thomas fumbled for a light switch, and a soft glow filled the room, revealing a space frozen in time. Old diagrams and prototypes lined the walls, remnants of Neuralink's early days. A worn couch sat in one corner, and a desk cluttered with papers occupied another. Thomas felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with regret. This place represented everything he had lost, everything that had been taken from him. Shaking off the memories, Thomas moved to the desk. He needed to focus on the present, on the documents that could change everything. As he spread the papers out, his eyes widened. Financial records, email transcripts, and confidential memos painted a picture of corruption and deceit that went far beyond what he had imagined. Neuralink, his life's work, had been twisted into something unrecognizable. The brain-computer interface technology he had developed to help people was being weaponized, sold to the highest bidder without regard for ethics or legality. And at the center of it all were the names of those he had once trusted most: Victor Reeves, Sarah Blackwood, and Michael Chen, Eleanor's own son. As Thomas delved deeper into the documents, his head began to throb. The sheer volume of information, combined with his condition, made it difficult to concentrate. He rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the encroaching fog of confusion. A sudden noise outside made him freeze. Had Victor found him already? Thomas held his breath, listening intently. After a moment of tense silence, he heard it again, the soft mewling of a cat. He exhaled slowly, his heart rate gradually returning to normal. Turning back to the documents, Thomas knew he needed help. This was too big, too complex for him to handle alone, especially with his deteriorating mental state. But who could he trust? The betrayal ran deep, and he had no idea how far the corruption had spread. As if in answer to his unspoken question, His eyes fell on a framed photo on the desk. It showed a younger version of himself with Eleanor and her son, Michael. They were smiling, celebrating the first successful test of their neural interface prototype. Thomas picked up the frame, a mix of emotions swirling within him. Michael had been like a son to him once. How could he have been involved in this betrayal? Thomas couldn't reconcile the earnest young man he remembered with the corporate shark described in these documents. There had to be more to the story. With a sudden clarity that surprised him, Thomas knew what he had to do. He needed to find Michael. If there was any chance of understanding what had happened, of finding a way to make things right, it lay with Eleanor's son. But first he needed to secure these documents. Thomas looked around the boathouse, searching for a hiding place. His eyes landed on a loose floorboard near the couch. Perfect. He carefully tucked the folder into the space beneath the board, making sure it was well hidden. As he straightened up, a wave of dizziness washed over him. Thomas stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the desk. The stress and lack of sleep were taking their toll. He knew he needed to rest, to recharge before facing what lay ahead. Thomas made his way to the couch, his body heavy with exhaustion. As he lay down, his thoughts drifted to Isa. Was she safe in the bakery? Had Victor discovered her? The worry gnawed at him, but he knew he was in no condition to protect her right now. He had to trust that she was smart and resourceful enough to stay hidden. As sleep began to claim him, Thomas's mind whirled with fragments of memories and new revelations. In his dreams, faces and voices blended together, Isa's determined expression, Victor's cold smile, Michael's youthful enthusiasm. Somewhere in this tangle of relationships and betrayals lay the key to unraveling it all. The gentle lapping of water against the shore outside the boathouse provided a soothing backdrop, lulling Thomas into a deeper sleep. For the first time in months, his dreams were not plagued by confusion and fear, but filled with purpose and resolve. Hours passed and the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. Thomas stirred, momentarily disoriented by his unfamiliar surroundings. As the events of the previous night came rushing back, he sat up, his mind clearer than it had been in a long time. He knew what he had to do: find Michael, get answers, and most importantly, ensure Isa's safety. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but Thomas felt a renewed sense of determination. He had been given a second chance, an opportunity to right the wrongs of the past and forge a new future. As he stood, stretching his aching muscles, Thomas caught sight of his reflection in a dusty mirror. The man looking back at him was older, more weathered than he remembered, but there was a fire in his eyes that had been missing for too long. "Time to get to work," he muttered to himself, a hint of his old confidence creeping into his voice. Thomas took one last look around the boathouse, this sanctuary that had provided him with both refuge and revelation. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped out into the early morning light, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The quest for truth and redemption was just beginning, and Thomas Hartley was finally ready to reclaim his life and protect those who needed him most. With Isa's trust, the damning documents, and a renewed sense of purpose, he set out to unravel the conspiracy that had stolen everything from him, and in doing so, perhaps find a new reason to keep fighting. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Thomas made his way back to the bakery. His mind was clearer than it had been in months, sharpened by the revelations of the previous night and the urgency of his mission. As he approached the familiar storefront, a mix of anticipation and dread churned in his stomach. He paused at the corner, scanning the street for any sign of Victor or his associates. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, Thomas approached the bakery's side door, his hand shaking slightly as he raised it to knock. Tap, 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 tap. The secret knock he and Isa had devised seemed to echo in the quiet morning air. For a moment there was nothing but silence, and Thomas felt his heart begin to race. Had something happened to Isa? Had Victor found her? Then, mercifully, he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching the door. It opened a crack, and Isa's wide, wary eyes peered out at him. "Mr. Hartley," she whispered, her voice thick with relief. "It's me, Isa. It's safe now." The door flew open, and before Thomas could react, Isa had thrown her arms around him, burying her face in his worn jacket. He felt her small body trembling and realized with a pang of guilt how terrified she must have been. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, gently patting her back. "I shouldn't have left you alone." Issa pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's okay, I'm just glad you're all right. Did you find what you were looking for?" Thomas nodded, ushering her back inside and locking the door behind them. The familiar scent of yeast and sugar enveloped him, a stark contrast to the musty air of the boathouse. "I did, Issa, and it's complicated. But I think I know what we need to do next." As they made their way to the small office in the back of the bakery, Thomas couldn't help but notice how exhausted Issa looked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes were rumpled from a night spent hiding in the bakery. "Did you get any sleep?" he asked gently. Issa shook her head. "I was too scared. I kept thinking I heard noises outside." Thomas felt another wave of guilt wash over him. This child had already been through so much, and now she was caught up in his dangerous quest for the truth. He needed to find a way to keep her safe. "Issa," he said, kneeling down to meet her eyes, "I want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to protect you, but things might get difficult in the next few days. I need to know if there's anyone you trust, anyone who might be able to look after you if I can't." Issa's brow furrowed in thought. "There's Mrs. Rossi," she said after a moment. "She lives next door to us. She's nice. Sometimes she gives me cookies and lets me play with her cat when my stepdad is... when he's not in a good mood." Thomas nodded, committing the name to memory. "That's good, Issa. Mrs. Rossi might be able to help us. But for now, I need you to tell me everything you can about your stepdad. When did he start acting strangely? Did he ever mention Neuralink or any of the people I used to work with?" As Issa began to speak, Thomas listened intently, his mind working to piece together the puzzle. The girl's stepdad, a man named Frank Donovan, had apparently come into Issa's life about a year ago, shortly after Thomas's fall from grace at Neuralink. He worked nights, often came home agitated, and had started receiving frequent visits from men in expensive suits. "And last week," Issa added, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I heard him on the phone. He sounded scared. He kept saying something about Phase 2 and that he needed more time." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Phase 2. It had to be connected to whatever Neuralink was planning with their corrupted version of his technology. But what exactly were they doing? As he pondered this new information, a wave of dizziness suddenly washed over him. Thomas gripped the edge of the desk, trying to steady himself as the room seemed to tilt and spin around him. "Mr. Hartley?" Issa's voice sounded far away. "Are you okay?" Thomas blinked hard, trying to focus. This was happening more frequently now, these episodes of disorientation. He couldn't afford to lose himself, not when there was so much at stake. "I'm fine," he managed to say, though the words felt thick in his mouth. Just give me a moment." As he fought to regain his composure, fragmented memories flashed through his mind. The Neuralink lab, late nights working on the neural interface prototype, heated arguments with the board about the ethical implications of their work, and Michael Chen, always there, always supportive, until he wasn't. With a gasp, Thomas snapped back to the present. Issa was staring at him, her eyes wide with concern. "We need to find Michael," Thomas said, his voice stronger now. "He's the key to all of this. He knows what they're planning, and I think he might be our best chance at stopping it." Issa nodded, though she looked uncertain. "But how do we find him? And what about my stepdad? What if he comes looking for me?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. Victor and his associates would surely be searching for them by now. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, trying to infuse his voice with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "First, we're going to get you somewhere safe. We'll talk to Mrs. Rossi, see if she can look after you for a few days. Then I'm going to track down Michael. I have an idea of where he might be." As he outlined the plan to Issa, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was more dangerous and far-reaching than he had ever imagined. Outside the bakery, the city was coming to life. People hurried to work, unaware of the secret war being waged in their midst. Thomas Hartley, once a titan of the tech world, now stood as the unlikely last line of defense against a threat that could reshape the very nature of human consciousness. With Issa by his side, Thomas prepared to take the next step in their perilous journey. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in a long time he felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they just might have a chance to unravel the conspiracy and bring the truth to light. As they left the safety of the bakery, stepping out into the uncertain future, Thomas made a silent vow. No matter what happened, no matter what it cost him, he would see this through to the end. For Issa, for himself, and for the countless lives that hung in the balance, he would fight to reclaim not just his past, but the future he had once dreamed of creating. The game was afoot, and Thomas Hartley was finally ready to play. The sun had fully risen by the time Thomas and Issa made their way to Mrs. Rossi's house. The streets were busier now, filled with people going about their daily lives, oblivious to the high-stakes drama unfolding around them. Thomas kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, painfully aware of how exposed they were. Mrs. Rossi's home was a modest but well-maintained bungalow, its small front yard bursting with colourful flowers. As they approached the door, Thomas felt Issa's small hand slip into his, squeezing tightly. He looked down at her, struck by the trust she placed in him. "It's going to be okay," he reassured her, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. The door opened after the second knock, revealing a kind-faced woman in her 60s. Her eyes widened in surprise as she took in the unlikely pair on her doorstep. "Issa, what are you doing here, dear? And who's this?" Thomas stepped forward, mustering his most charming smile. "Mrs. Rossi, I'm Thomas Hartley, a friend of Issa's. We were hoping we could speak with you for a moment. It's rather important." Mrs. Rossi hesitated for just a second before her maternal instincts seemed to kick in. She ushered them inside, her brow furrowed with concern. "Of course, come in. Is everything all right? You both look like you've had quite a night." As they settled into Mrs. Rossi's cozy living room, Thomas took a deep breath. How much could he tell her without putting her in danger? How much did he need to reveal to ensure Issa's safety? "Mrs. Rossi," he began, choosing his words carefully, "Issa is in a difficult situation at home. We have reason to believe she might be in danger if she stays there. I know this is a lot to ask, but would you be willing to look after her for a few days while we sort things out?" Mrs. Rossi's eyes darted between Thomas and Issa, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "Danger? What kind of danger? Should we call the authorities?" Thomas shook his head. "It's complicated. The people involved are powerful. Going to the police right now might make things worse, but I promise you I'm working on making things right. Issa just needs a safe place to stay for a little while." There was a moment of tense silence as Mrs. Rossi processed this information. Then, to Thomas's immense relief, she nodded. "Of course. Issa can stay with me. I've always worried about that child. But Mr. Hartley, I hope you know what you're doing." As they worked out the details, Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. At least Issa would be safe here, away from the dangers that lurked in the shadows of his past. After making sure Issa was settled and exchanging contact information with Mrs. Rossi, Thomas prepared to leave. As he stood at the door, Issa rushed over and hugged him fiercely. "Be careful, Mr. Hartley," she whispered, "and come back soon." Thomas swallowed the lump in his throat. "I will, Issa. I promise." As he walked away from Mrs. Rossi's house, Thomas's mind raced with his next steps. He needed to find Michael Chen, but where to start? The last he had heard, Michael had left Neuralink shortly after the coup that ousted Thomas. But why? And where had he gone? Lost in thought, Thomas almost missed the sleek black car that pulled up beside him. His heart leapt into his throat as the rear window rolled down, revealing a face he hadn't seen in years. "Hello, Thomas," said Eleanor Chen, her voice as crisp and authoritative as he remembered. "I think it's time we had a talk, don't you?" For a moment, Thomas stood frozen, his mind struggling to process this new development. Eleanor Chen, Michael's mother and his former mentor, was the last person he had expected to see. Was she friend or foe in this tangled web of deceit? Making a split-second decision, Thomas nodded and got into the car. As they pulled away from the curb, he couldn't help but feel that he had just crossed a point of no return. The interior of the car was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past 24 hours. Eleanor sat across from him, her piercing gaze studying him intently. "You're looking for Michael," she said. It wasn't a question. Thomas nodded, his guard up. "I need to talk to him. I think he knows what's really going on at Neuralink." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Oh, Thomas. He knows far more than that. We both do." As the car wound its way through the city streets, Eleanor began to fill in the gaps in Thomas's knowledge. Michael hadn't betrayed him, she explained. He had gone deep undercover, infiltrating the corrupt inner circle of Neuralink to gather evidence of their illegal activities. "But something went wrong," Eleanor continued, her voice tight with worry. "Michael missed his last 3 check-ins. We fear his cover may have been blown." Thomas leaned back, his mind reeling from this new information. Michael was on his side. He hadn't been abandoned after all. A mix of relief and renewed determination washed over him. "So what now?" he asked. "How do we find Michael and stop whatever Neuralink is planning?" Eleanor pulled out a sleek tablet, her fingers dancing across its surface. "We've been monitoring chatter within the company. There's a secret facility outside the city, where they're conducting the final tests for Phase 2. We believe that's where Michael is being held." As Eleanor showed him satellite images and blueprints of the facility, Thomas felt a familiar excitement building within him. This was what he had been missing, a clear goal, a chance to make things right. "We're putting together a team to infiltrate the facility," Eleanor explained. "With your inside knowledge of Neuralink's systems and Michael's intel, we might just have a chance of shutting this operation down for good." Thomas nodded, his resolve strengthening. But then a wave of dizziness washed over him, a stark reminder of his condition. He gripped the edge of his seat, trying to steady himself. Eleanor noticed his distress. "Thomas, are you all right?" He took a deep breath, forcing the fog to recede. "I'm fine. It's just, I have early onset Alzheimer's. Sometimes it's hard to focus, to remember." Eleanor's eyes widened in understanding. "Oh, Thomas, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." For a moment, Thomas saw pity in her eyes, and it made him bristle. He straightened up, squaring his shoulders. "I can do this, Eleanor. I have to do this. For Michael, for Issa, for everyone Neuralink has hurt." Eleanor studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but we'll need to be prepared. If you have an episode during the mission—" "I won't," Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. "I can't afford to." As the car pulled up to a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Thomas felt a surge of anticipation. This was it, the beginning of the end game. Whatever Neuralink was planning, whatever dangers lay ahead, he was ready to face them. Eleanor turned to him one last time before they exited the car. "Are you sure about this, Thomas? Once we start, there's no turning back." Thomas thought of Issa's trusting face, of Michael risking everything to uncover the truth, of all the lives that hung in the balance. His response was immediate and resolute. "I'm sure. Let's finish this." As they stepped out into the warm afternoon sun, Thomas Hartley felt more like his old self than he had in months. The fog of confusion and despair that had clouded his mind for so long was lifting, burned away by the fire of purpose and the warmth of unexpected allies. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was no longer facing them alone. With Eleanor's resources, Michael's inside information and his own determination, they just might have a chance of bringing down the corrupt empire that had risen from the ashes of his life's work. The final battle was about to begin, and Thomas Hartley was ready to reclaim not just his past, but the future he had always dreamed of creating. The warehouse Eleanor had brought Thomas to was a hive of activity. As they stepped inside, Thomas was struck by the contrast between the building's nondescript exterior and the high-tech operation within. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens flickering with data streams and surveillance footage. Men and women moved purposefully about, their faces set with determination. Eleanor led Thomas to a central area where a large holographic display dominated the space. It showed a detailed 3D render of what Thomas assumed was the Neuralink facility they were targeting. "Welcome to our command center," Eleanor said, her voice tinged with pride. "We've been building this operation for months, gathering intel and resources. With you here, we might finally have what we need to bring Neuralink down." Thomas nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "It's impressive. But who are all these people? How did you put this together without Neuralink finding out? Eleanor's expression turned grim. Not everyone was fooled by Victor's coup, Thomas. Many of your old colleagues and employees suspected foul play. Some reached out to me, knowing my connection to you and Michael. Others were recruited carefully over time. We're a mix of ex-Neuralink employees, ethical hackers, and even a few government agents who are very interested in what Victor and his cronies have been up to. As Eleanor spoke, a tall, athletic woman approached them. Her sharp eyes assessed Thomas critically before turning to Eleanor. "Is this him?" she asked, her tone skeptical. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, this is Thomas Hartley. Thomas, meet Agent Sarah Reeves. She's been instrumental in coordinating our efforts with various government agencies." Thomas's eyebrows shot up. "Reeves? Any relation to Victor?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "He's my brother, and the reason I'm here. What he's done, what he's planning to do, it has to be stopped." Thomas felt a surge of sympathy for the woman. He knew all too well the pain of betrayal by those closest to you. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "and thank you for your help." Sarah nodded curtly, then turned back to Eleanor. "We've got a problem. Our inside source at the facility just went dark. We're running out of time." Eleanor's face paled. "Michael?" Sarah shook her head. "No, not Michael, our other asset. But it means security at the facility is likely being tightened as we speak. If we're going to move, it needs to be soon." Thomas felt a familiar pressure building behind his eyes, the precursor to one of his episodes. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. What exactly is this Phase 2 they're working on? What are we up against? Eleanor guided him to a nearby workstation, pulling up a series of documents and schematics. "From what we've gathered, they've taken your original neural interface technology and weaponized it. They're not just connecting minds to computers anymore, Thomas. They're working on connecting minds to other minds, creating a network of shared consciousness." Thomas felt his blood run cold. "But that's incredibly dangerous. The human mind isn't meant to be networked like that. The psychological trauma alone could be devastating, not to mention the potential for abuse." Sarah nodded grimly. "Exactly, and that's not even the worst of it. We have reason to believe they're planning to use this technology for mass manipulation. Imagine being able to control the thoughts and actions of thousands, maybe even millions of people simultaneously. The implications were staggering. Thomas's mind raced with the potential consequences of such technology falling into the wrong hands. It was everything he had feared when he first began developing the neural interface, everything he had sworn to prevent. "We can't let this happen," Thomas said, his voice filled with resolve. "Whatever it takes, we have to shut this down." Eleanor smiled, a hint of her old pride in him shining through. "That's the Thomas Hartley I remember. Now let's go over the plan." For the next few hours, Thomas immersed himself in the details of the operation. They would infiltrate the facility under the cover of darkness, using a combination of hacked security systems and inside knowledge to navigate the complex. Their primary objectives were to extract Michael, if he was indeed being held there, and to destroy the central servers containing the Phase 2 research data. As they fine-tuned the plan, Thomas found himself slipping back into his role as a leader. Despite the fog that sometimes clouded his thoughts, his strategic mind was as sharp as ever when it came to tech and systems. He suggested modifications to their hacking approach, pointed out potential vulnerabilities in the facility's layout, and helped refine their extraction protocols. But as the day wore on, Thomas felt his energy flagging. The constant focus, combined with the stress and lack of sleep from the past few days, was taking its toll. During a lull in the preparations, Eleanor pulled him aside. "Thomas, are you sure you're up for this?" she asked, her voice low with concern. "The field team is prepared to handle the infiltration. You don't have to be there physically." Thomas shook his head stubbornly. "I have to go, Eleanor. I need to see this through, and if Michael is in there, he'll need someone he trusts." Eleanor studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful, and if you feel an episode coming on, you tell us immediately. We can't afford any mistakes once we're inside." As the team made their final preparations, Thomas's thoughts drifted to Issa. He hoped she was safe with Mrs. Rossi, blissfully unaware of the danger he was about to face. He made a mental note to call and check on her before they left for the mission. Just then, Sarah approached, her face tense. "We've got movement at the facility. A convoy just arrived, heavily guarded. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Then we move tonight. No more waiting." As the command center erupted into a flurry of activity, Thomas felt a strange calm settle over him. This was it. The moment that would define not just his future, but potentially the future of humanity. The stakes couldn't be higher, and yet he felt more alive than he had in months. He thought of all the people counting on him, Issa, Michael, Eleanor, and countless others, who would be affected by Neuralink's twisted vision. He couldn't let them down. Despite his condition, despite the odds stacked against them, he would see this through to the end. As the team geared up for the mission, Thomas caught his reflection in a darkened computer screen. The man looking back at him was older, wearier than he remembered, but there was a fire in his eyes that had been missing for too long. He was Thomas Hartley, innovator, leader, and now reluctant hero. Whatever challenges lay ahead in that fortified facility, whatever dangers they would face, Thomas was ready. With renewed purpose and unexpected allies by his side, he prepared to take the fight to victor and reclaim not just his legacy but the very future of human consciousness. The storm was gathering, and Thomas Hartley was ready to stand at its center. The night air was crisp and still as the team made their final preparations. Thomas stood at the edge of the warehouse's loading dock, his eyes fixed on the horizon where he knew the Neuralink facility waited. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the mix of anticipation and fear churning in his stomach. "You ready for this?" Sarah's voice came from behind him, startling him slightly. Thomas turned to face her, nodding with more confidence than he felt. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You?" Sarah's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Born ready. But listen, Hartley, I need to know you've got my back in there. No hesitations, no lapses. Can you promise me that?" Thomas met her gaze steadily. "I promise, Sarah. Whatever happens in there, I won't let you down." She studied him for a moment longer before nodding, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Let's go save the world then, shall we?" As they made their way to the waiting vehicles, Thomas felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Eleanor, her face etched with concern. "Thomas, I want you to have this," she said, pressing a small device into his hand. It looked like a simple earbud, but Thomas recognized it as cutting-edge tech. "It's a neural stabilizer. It should help keep your mind focused and clear, even if you start to have an episode. But be careful, it's not a cure, and overuse could have side effects." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "Eleanor, Thank you." She pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. "Just come back safe, all of you, and bring my son home." The drive to the Neuralink facility was tense and quiet. Thomas sat in the back of a nondescript van, surrounded by a team of operatives he had only just met. Each face was a mask of determination, each mind focused on the dangerous task ahead. As they neared their destination, Sarah began the final briefing. "Remember, our primary objectives are to locate and extract Michael Chen, and to destroy the central servers containing the Phase 2 research. We'll be operating in teams of 3. Comms silence once we're inside unless absolutely necessary. If you're compromised, use the emergency beacon. Any questions?" The van fell silent. Sarah nodded, satisfied. "All right, may fortune favor the bold." They pulled up to a secluded spot about a half-mile from the facility. As they exited the vehicles, Thomas was struck by how ordinary the building looked from the outside, just another anonymous corporate complex on the outskirts of the city. But he knew that appearances could be deceiving. Sarah's team took point, using sophisticated hacking tools to disable the perimeter alarms and security cameras. Thomas followed close behind, his heart pounding in his chest. He slipped the neural stabilizer into his ear, feeling a slight tingle as it activated. They made their way across the manicured lawn, keeping to the shadows. Thomas marveled at the efficiency of the team. Each person seemed to know exactly where to go and what to do, without a word being spoken. As they approached a side entrance, Sarah held up a hand, signaling the team to stop. She pulled out a device that looked like a high-tech stethoscope and pressed it to the door. After a moment she nodded, and one of her team members stepped forward with a keycard skimmer. Seconds later they were inside. The interior of the facility was a stark contrast to its mundane exterior. Sleek, futuristic corridors stretched out before them, bathed in the soft blue glow of recessed lighting. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. This place was the embodiment of everything he had feared his technology might become. They moved swiftly and silently through the halls, guided by the blueprints they had memorized. At each junction, Sarah would hold up a hand, listening intently before signaling which way to go. As they descended deeper into the complex, Thomas began to notice subtle changes in the environment. The air grew cooler, and there was a faint humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls. They were getting close to the heart of the facility. Suddenly, Sarah held up a closed fist, the signal to stop. She pointed to a door just ahead, then held up 2 fingers. 2 guards. Thomas watched in amazement as Sarah and another team member moved forward with incredible stealth. In a matter of seconds, the guards were subdued without a sound, their unconscious forms quickly hidden in a nearby storage closet. As they prepared to enter the secured area beyond, Thomas felt a familiar pressure building behind his eyes. He blinked hard, trying to focus. The neural stabilizer hummed in his ear, and slowly the fog began to recede. Sarah caught his eye, a question in her gaze. Thomas nodded, indicating he was okay to continue. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a vast, open space filled with rows upon rows of servers. The hum Thomas had noticed earlier was much louder here, the combined sound of countless processors working in unison. "This is it," Sarah whispered. "The heart of Phase 2. Plant the charges, then we find Michael and get out." As the team spread out to place explosive charges at key points around the room, Thomas made his way to a central control terminal. His fingers flew over the keyboard, muscle memory taking over as he navigated the familiar yet foreign system. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Phase 2 project was even more advanced than they had feared. Neuralink wasn't just planning to network minds. They were on the verge of creating a hive consciousness, a collective intelligence that could potentially subsume individual thought entirely. "Sarah," he called softly, "you need to see this." But before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red warning lights bathed the room in an eerie glow. "We've been made," one of the team members shouted. "Security teams incoming." Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Stick to the plan. Finish planting those charges. Thomas, grab what data you can. We're getting out of here." As the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors, Thomas frantically downloaded what he could onto a portable drive. The team regrouped at the main entrance, tensions high. "What about Michael?" Thomas asked, his voice urgent. Sarah's face was grim. "No time. We'll have to find another way to—" Her words were cut off as the doors burst open, revealing a squad of heavily armed security personnel. And at their head, a face Thomas knew all too well. Victor Reeves stood before them, a cold smile playing on his lips. "Thomas, old friend, welcome home." In that moment, as sirens wailed and weapons were leveled at them, Thomas realized that their mission had just become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The true test was only just beginning. The tension in the room was palpable as Thomas and Victor faced each other, years of history and betrayal hanging between them like an invisible barrier. Thomas could feel Sarah and the rest of the team tensing beside him, ready for action at a moment's notice. Victor's smile never wavered as he took a step forward. "I must say, Thomas, I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you to mount such an ambitious operation, especially given your condition." Thomas felt a flash of anger at Victor's condescending tone. He straightened his back, meeting Victor's gaze steadily. "Some things are worth fighting for, Victor, even if you've forgotten that." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that Thomas's words had struck a nerve. "Always the idealist, aren't you? But idealism has no place in the real world, Thomas. You should have learned that by now." As Victor spoke, Thomas's mind raced. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they still had one advantage: the explosives planted throughout the server room. If they could just find a way to detonate them. "Where's Michael?" Thomas demanded, hoping to buy some time. "What have you done with him?" A flicker of surprise crossed Victor's face before he schooled his features back into a mask of calm. "Michael? Oh, Thomas, you really don't know, do you?" Before Thomas could respond, there was a commotion from the back of the room. The security team parted, and a familiar figure stepped forward. "Hello, Dad," Michael Chen said, his voice cool and detached. Thomas felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Michael stood there not as a prisoner, but as one of them. He wore the sleek uniform of Neuralink's executive team, a small pin on his lapel indicating his high rank within the organization. "Michael?" Thomas breathed, disbelief coloring his voice. What's going on?" Michael's expression remained impassive. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, Dad, but you left us no choice." Sarah tensed beside Thomas, her voice a harsh whisper. "You played us." All this time, Michael's eyes flickered to Sarah, a hint of regret passing across his face. "It wasn't personal, Agent Reeves. We're on the verge of changing the world. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good." Thomas felt as if he were drowning, his mind struggling to process this new betrayal. The neural stabilizer in his ear hummed, fighting against the wave of confusion threatening to overwhelm him. Victor clapped his hands together, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "Well, now that we've had our little reunion, perhaps we can discuss this like civilized people. Thomas, why don't you call off your team, and we can talk about Neuralink's glorious future. A future you could still be a part of if you're willing to see reason." Thomas's mind whirled. This had to be a trick, a ploy to get them to lower their guard. But as he looked at Michael standing tall and confident among their enemies, doubt began to creep in. It was Sarah who broke the standoff. In one fluid motion, she drew her weapon and fired at the ceiling. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, causing everyone to duck instinctively. "Now!" Sarah shouted. The team sprang into action. Smoke grenades were deployed, filling the room with thick, obscuring fog. The sound of gunfire and shouting filled the air as chaos erupted. Thomas felt a hand grab his arm, pulling him towards the exit. Through the smoke, he caught a glimpse of Michael's face, a mix of emotions playing across it: regret, determination, and something else Thomas couldn't quite identify. As they ran through the corridors, alarms blaring around them, Thomas's mind raced. Had everything been a lie? Was Michael truly working with Victor, or was there more to the story? They burst out of the facility into the cool night air, sprinting towards their extraction point. As they ran, Sarah pulled out a detonator. "Wait!" Thomas called out. "Michael's still in there!" Sarah's face was a mask of determination. "We don't have a choice, Thomas. The mission comes first." With that, she pressed the button. The ground shook as explosions ripped through the Neuralink facility behind them. Thomas stumbled, his heart in his throat, as he watched flames engulf the building that held not just his life's work, but now, potentially, the life of the young man he had come to think of as a son. As they piled into the waiting vehicles, Thomas's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief at their escape, warred with grief over Michael's apparent betrayal, and fear for his fate. The neural stabilizer buzzed in his ear, working overtime to keep his thoughts coherent. Eleanor's face appeared in his mind. How could he face her now? How could he tell her that her son, the very person they had come to rescue, had been working against them all along? As the vehicles sped away from the burning facility, Thomas made a silent vow. He would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. There had to be more to the story, some piece of the puzzle he was missing. The Michael he knew, the brilliant, compassionate young man who had stood by his side through the early days of Neuralink, couldn't be gone entirely. Thomas refused to believe it. As the adrenaline of their escape began to fade, exhaustion set in. Thomas leaned his head back, closing his eyes. The events of the night played out behind his eyelids like a fevered dream. In the distance, sirens wailed as emergency vehicles raced towards the destroyed facility. Thomas knew that this was far from over. Victor was still out there, and now Michael was a wild card in a game that had suddenly become far more complex and dangerous. As they drove through the night, heading back to their hidden base, Thomas steeled himself for the challenges ahead. He had started this journey to reclaim his past and secure a better future. Now he realized he was fighting for something even more important, the soul of the young man he had mentored, and the very nature of human consciousness itself. The war had only just begun, and Thomas Hartley was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The journey back to their hidden base was a blur of conflicting emotions and tense silence. Thomas sat in the back of the van, his mind replaying the events at the Neuralink facility over and over. The image of Michael standing alongside Victor, cool and detached, was seared into his memory. As they pulled into the warehouse, Thomas could see Eleanor waiting anxiously by the entrance. His heart sank. How could he possibly tell her what had happened? The moment the van stopped, Eleanor rushed forward. "Thomas, thank God you're safe. Where's Michael? Is he—" Thomas stepped out of the van, his legs unsteady. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The look on his face must have said it all. Eleanor's eyes widened in horror. "No. Please, no. Tell me he's not—" Sarah stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Chen, there's something you need to know. Michael, he wasn't a prisoner. He was working with them. With Neuralink." Eleanor stumbled back as if she'd been struck. That's impossible. There must be some mistake." Thomas reached out to steady her. "I saw him myself, Eleanor. He was there, in a Neuralink uniform. He called Victor's team us." Eleanor shook her head violently. "No, I don't believe it. I won't believe it. My son would never—" Her words were cut off as she broke down, sobs racking her body. Thomas held her, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. The next few hours were a whirlwind of debriefings and damage control. The destruction of the Neuralink facility was all over the news, described as a catastrophic industrial accident. There was no mention of Michael or any other survivors. As the team gathered in the command center to assess the situation, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. He stood before the holographic display, studying the blueprints of the now-destroyed facility. "It doesn't make sense," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Sarah looked up from her report. "What doesn't?" Thomas gestured to the plans. "All of this. If Michael was really working with Neuralink, why lead us there? Why let us plant explosives throughout the server room? It's almost as if—" He trailed off, a new possibility forming in his mind. Could it be that Michael's apparent betrayal was just another layer of his deep cover operation? Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. "Don't go there, Thomas. We can't afford to second-guess ourselves based on hope and speculation." But Thomas couldn't let it go. He turned to Eleanor, who sat quietly in a corner, her face pale and drawn. "Eleanor, think back. Did Michael ever give you any indication, any hint at all that he might be planning something like this?" Eleanor looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but suddenly alert. "Now that you mention it, there was something. About a month ago he sent me a message. It seemed odd at the time, but I thought perhaps he was just being sentimental. He said, 'Mom, remember the summer we spent at Lake Tahoe? Sometimes the deepest truths lie beneath the surface.'" Thomas felt a spark of excitement. "Lake Tahoe, that's where we first tested the neural interface prototype, and beneath the surface." "Eleanor, do you think he could have been trying to tell us something?" Sarah interjected, her voice skeptical. "That's a pretty thin thread to hang our hopes on, Hartley. It could just be a coincidence." "Maybe," Thomas conceded. "But what if it's not? What if Michael is still on our side, playing a long game that we can't see yet?" The room fell silent as everyone considered the possibility. It was Eleanor who finally broke the silence, her voice stronger now. "If there's even a chance that my son is still out there, still fighting for what's right, we have to pursue it. We owe him that much." Thomas nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Agreed, but we need to be smart about this. Victor and his team will be on high alert after what happened. We can't afford to make any moves that might put Michael in danger if he is still under cover." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "All right, let's say for a moment that you're right. What's our next move?" Thomas turned back to the holographic display, his mind racing. "We need more information. The facility may be gone, but the data I managed to download might give us some clues. And we need to dig deeper into Neuralink's operations, find out where they might have moved their Phase 2 research." As the team began to formulate a new plan, Thomas felt the familiar pressure building behind his eyes. He reached up to touch the neural stabilizer in his ear, grateful for its steadying influence. He couldn't afford to lose focus now, not when there was still a chance to save Michael and stop Neuralink's dangerous plans. Eleanor approached him, placing a hand on his arm. "Thomas, are you sure you're up for this? After everything that's happened?" Thomas met her gaze, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. "I have to be, Eleanor. For Michael. For Isa. For all of us. We started this together and we'll finish it together. As the night wore on and plans were made, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something much larger than they had initially realized. The game had changed, the stakes raised higher than ever before, but with every challenge came opportunity. If Michael was indeed still on their side, they might have an ace up their sleeve that even Victor Reeves couldn't anticipate. As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows through the warehouse windows, Thomas Hartley stood ready to face whatever came next. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and deception. But for the first time since this journey began, Thomas felt a glimmer of real hope. The fight for the future of human consciousness was far from over, and Thomas was determined to see it through, no matter where it led or what sacrifices it demanded. The next move was theirs, and Thomas intended to make it count. The following days were a blur of intense activity. The warehouse that had served as their command center was now a hive of round-the-clock analysis and strategizing. Thomas found himself at the heart of it all, his expertise in Neuralink systems proving invaluable as they combed through the data he had managed to salvage from the facility. It was during one of these late-night sessions, as Thomas pored over lines of code that seemed to blur together, that he felt a small hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Isa standing beside him, her young face etched with concern. "Mr. Hartley," she said softly, "Mrs. Rossi brought me. She said you might need me." Thomas blinked, momentarily disoriented. With everything that had happened, he had almost forgotten about the brave little girl who had started him on this journey. "Isa," he breathed, pulling her into a hug. "I'm so glad you're safe." As he held her, Thomas felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had been so caught up in the mission, in the betrayal and the aftermath, that he had neglected to check on the very person who had given him hope when he needed it most. "I'm sorry I didn't call," he said, pulling back to look at her. "Things have been complicated." Isa nodded solemnly, her eyes wise beyond her years. "I know. Mrs. Rossi told me a little. She said you're trying to stop some bad people from doing something really dangerous." Thomas couldn't help but smile at her simplification of their complex situation. "That's right. But don't worry, we're being very careful." Isa's brow furrowed as she looked at the screens surrounding them. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Thomas was about to gently refuse when an idea struck him. Children often saw patterns that adults missed, their minds unencumbered by preconceptions. "Actually," he said, "there might be. Come here. Let me show you something." He pulled up a series of images on the screen, complex diagrams of neural pathways that he and his team had been struggling to decipher. "These are pictures of how our brains work," he explained. "We're trying to figure out if there's a hidden message in them, like a really complicated puzzle." Isa leaned in, her eyes scanning the images with intense focus. For several minutes, she said nothing, just staring at the screen. Just as Thomas was beginning to think this might have been a mistake, Isa pointed to a section of one of the diagrams. "There," she said. "It looks like a lake." Thomas leaned in, squinting at where she was pointing. At first, he saw nothing but the usual tangle of neural connections, but then, slowly, a pattern emerged. The way the pathways interconnected did indeed form a shape reminiscent of a lake, a very specific lake. "Lake Tahoe," Thomas whispered, his heart racing. He quickly pulled up other diagrams, and with Isa's help, they began to see more hidden shapes, a boat, a cabin, coordinates. It was as if Michael had encoded a map directly into the neural pathways, knowing that only someone intimately familiar with the original Neuralink research would recognize it. "Isa, you're a genius," Thomas exclaimed, giving her another quick hug. The commotion had drawn the attention of the others. Sarah and Eleanor hurried over, their faces a mix of curiosity and hope. "What is it? What did you find?" Eleanor asked, her voice urgent. Thomas quickly explained their discovery, watching as understanding dawned on their faces. "This has to be from Michael," he concluded. "He's left us a breadcrumb trail to follow." Sarah nodded, her earlier skepticism giving way to cautious optimism. "It's clever. Even if Neuralink intercepted these files, they'd never suspect the diagrams themselves contained a message. But where is it leading us?" Thomas turned back to the screens, his mind racing. "Lake Tahoe. That's where it all began, where we first tested the neural interface. There must be something there, some piece of information Michael wants us to find. Eleanor's eyes lit up with renewed hope. We have to go. If there's even a chance Michael left something for us. Agreed, Sarah said, already pulling out her phone to make arrangements. But we need to be careful. If we figured this out, there's a chance Neuralink has too. We can't afford to walk into a trap. As the team sprang into action, preparing for their journey to Lake Tahoe, Thomas felt a tugging on his sleeve. He looked down to see Issa, her face a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Can I come with you, Mr. Hartley?" she asked. "I want to help." Thomas knelt down to her level, his heart heavy. "Isa, I'm sorry, but it's too dangerous. You've already helped us so much. The best thing you can do now is stay here where it's safe." Disappointment flashed across Issa's face, but she nodded bravely. "Okay, but promise you'll be careful and that you'll come back." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "I promise, Issa. And when this is all over, we'll figure out a way to make sure you're safe and happy, okay?" As Issa hugged him tightly, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a promise he might not be able to keep. The road ahead was fraught with danger, and there was no guarantee of a happy ending. But as he looked around at the determined faces of his team, at Eleanor's renewed hope and Sarah's steady resolve, Thomas felt a surge of determination. They had come too far to give up now. Whatever secrets Lake Tahoe held, whatever dangers awaited them, they would face it together. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the warehouse windows, Thomas Hartley prepared himself for the next phase of their journey. The neural stabilizer hummed reassuringly in his ear, a constant reminder of both his vulnerability and his strength. With one last look at the encoded neural pathways that had given them this new lead, Thomas set his jaw with determination. Michael was out there, fighting his own battle from within the heart of Neuralink. It was time to bring him home and put an end to Victor's dangerous ambitions once and for all. The game was far from over. In fact, Thomas realized it was only just beginning. The journey to Lake Tahoe was tense, each member of the team lost in their own thoughts as they drove through the night. Thomas sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead, his mind whirling with memories and possibilities. Eleanor drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sarah followed close behind in another vehicle with a small team of operatives. They had decided to split up to attract less attention, but Thomas could feel the weight of their collective anticipation. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, the pristine waters of Lake Tahoe came into view. Thomas felt a surge of nostalgia mixed with apprehension. This place held so many memories, the excitement of those early days, the promise of what Neuralink could become. How had it all gone so wrong? "Where to?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight with emotion. Thomas closed his eyes, focusing on the mental image of the encoded neural pathways. "The old boathouse," he said after a moment, "on the North Shore." As they pulled up to the weathered structure, Thomas was struck by how little it had changed. The same peeling blue paint, the same creaky dock stretching out into the crystal-clear water. It was as if time had stood still here, preserving this small piece of the past. Sarah's team arrived shortly after, fanning out to secure the perimeter. "No signs of any Neuralink presence," she reported, "but stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into." Thomas nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The neural stabilizer hummed in his ear, a constant reminder of how much was at stake. "Let's do this," he said. As they approached the boathouse, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around, half expecting to see Victor or his men emerging from the shadows. But there was nothing, just the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the call of early morning birds. The door creaked open at Eleanor's touch, revealing an interior that was both familiar and strange. Dust covered every surface, but Thomas could still see echoes of the makeshift lab they had set up here years ago. An old whiteboard still bore faded equations in Michael's handwriting. "Look for anything out of place," Thomas instructed. "Michael would have left something that only we would recognize." They spread out, searching every nook and cranny of the small building. Thomas found himself drawn to the old desk where he and Michael had spent countless hours poring over data and refining algorithms. His fingers traced the worn wood, memories flooding back. "Thomas!" Eleanor called, her voice urgent. I think I found something. He hurried over to where she stood by a small bookshelf. Eleanor pointed to a book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly by Jean-Dominique Bauby. This was Michael's favorite book in college, she explained, but it doesn't belong here. We never kept personal items in the lab. Thomas carefully pulled the book from the shelf. As he did, a small device fell from between its pages, clattering to the floor. Sarah scooped it up, her eyes widening as she examined it. It's a data drive, she said, heavily encrypted from the looks of it. Thomas felt his heart race. This had to be what Michael wanted them to find. But before he could reach for the drive, a sharp pain lanced through his head. He stumbled, gripping the edge of the bookshelf for support. "Thomas!" Eleanor cried, reaching out to steady him. The world swam before his eyes, memories and present reality blurring together. He saw Michael as a young intern, eyes bright with excitement as they made their first breakthrough. He saw Victor's betrayal, the board meeting that had cost him everything. And then, cutting through it all, a crystal-clear image of Isa, her small face filled with trust and hope. "I'm okay," Thomas managed to say, the pain receding as quickly as it had come. "It's just a lot of memories here." Sarah looked at him with concern. "Maybe you should wait outside. We can handle this." Thomas shook his head firmly. "No, I need to see this through. Whatever's on that drive, it's meant for us to find together." They gathered around the old desk as Sarah connected the drive to a secure laptop. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen flickered to life, displaying a video file. Michael's face filled the screen, looking tired but determined. "Dad, Mom, if you're watching this, then you've figured out my message. I don't have much time, so listen carefully." Thomas leaned in, drinking in the sight of his protege, his heart aching with a mixture of relief and worry. Michael continued, his words coming fast and urgent. "Everything you think you know about Phase 2 is wrong. It's so much bigger, so much more dangerous than we ever imagined. Victor isn't the one in control. He's just a puppet. The real power behind Neuralink is a group called the Cognition Collective. They've been manipulating things from the shadows for years." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. The Cognition Collective was supposed to be a myth, a boogeyman whispered about in the darkest corners of the tech world. "I've managed to infiltrate their inner circle," Michael went on, "but I'm in deep, too deep to get out easily. They're planning something big, something that could change the very nature of human consciousness. I've hidden the full details of their plan in the one place they'd never think to look. The original Neuralink prototype. Dad, you know where it is?" Thomas's mind raced. The prototype. He had hidden it years ago when he first began to suspect that something was wrong at Neuralink, but could it still be there after all this time? Michael's expression softened, a hint of the young man Thomas remembered shining through. "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. I wanted to tell you, to explain, but it was too dangerous. I hope you can forgive me. And Dad, take care of yourself. Your mind is the key to stopping all of this. Don't let them take that from you." The video cut out, leaving them in stunned silence. Sarah was the first to speak. "The Cognition Collective. If they're real, if they're behind all this, we're dealing with something far beyond what we prepared for." Thomas nodded, his mind already racing ahead. "We need to find that prototype. It's our only lead now." Eleanor touched his arm gently. "Thomas, where did you hide it? After all this time, will it even still be there?" Thomas closed his eyes, focusing on the memory. It was hazy, obscured by time and the fog of his condition, but slowly it came into focus. "The old mining town," he said finally. "Ghost Ridge. I hid it in the abandoned bank vault." Sarah was already on her phone, coordinating with her team. "We'll need to move fast. If the collective is as powerful as Michael says, they could be onto us already." As they prepared to leave, Thomas took one last look around the boathouse. So many memories, so many dreams had been born here. And now it had given them the key to unraveling a conspiracy beyond anything they had imagined. With renewed determination, Thomas stepped out into the bright morning sun. The next phase of their journey was about to begin, and the stakes had never been higher. But with Michael's warning fresh in their minds, and the promise of answers tantalizingly close, Thomas felt a surge of hope. Whatever the Cognition Collective was planning, whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face it together. The future of human consciousness hung in the balance, and Thomas Hartley was ready to fight for it with every ounce of strength he had left. As they drove away from Lake Tahoe, leaving behind the echoes of the past, Thomas silently renewed his promise to Isa. He would see this through, not just for himself or for Michael, but for all those whose lives hung in the balance. The game had changed, but Thomas was more determined than ever to emerge victorious. The road to Ghost Ridge stretched out before them, a path into uncertainty and danger. But for the first time in a long while, Thomas felt truly alive. The pieces were falling into place, and the final confrontation was drawing near. Whatever awaited them in that abandoned mining town, Thomas knew it would be the key to everything. With one hand, he reached up to touch the neural stabilizer in his ear. With the other, he gripped the armrest of his seat. The journey was far from over, but Thomas Hartley was ready for whatever came next. The future of Neuralink, of human consciousness, of everything they had fought for, was waiting to be written, and Thomas was determined to make sure it was a future worth fighting for. The journey to Ghost Ridge was a stark contrast to the serene beauty of Lake Tahoe. As they drove deeper into the arid landscape, the world around them seemed to fade into shades of brown and gray. Dust clouds billowed behind their vehicles, obscuring the road they had traveled. Thomas sat in contemplative silence, his mind racing with the implications of Michael's message. The Cognition Collective, a name that sent chills down his spine. He had heard whispers of the group years ago, but had dismissed them as paranoid conspiracy theories. Now it seemed the conspiracy was all too real. "Thomas," Eleanor's voice broke through his reverie. "What exactly are we walking into here, this Ghost Ridge? What kind of place is it?" Thomas blinked, focusing on the present. "It was a boom town during the silver rush," he explained. "But it dried up fast when the mines were exhausted. By the time I hid the prototype there, it was already a ghost town. Abandoned for decades." Sarah, who was driving the lead vehicle, chimed in through the comm system. "Perfect place to hide something you don't want found, but also perfect for an ambush. We need to be prepared for anything." As they crested a hill, Ghost Ridge came into view. It was a haunting sight. Dilapidated wooden buildings lining a single main street, their windows dark and empty. The town looked frozen in time, a relic of a bygone era. They parked at the outskirts of town, not wanting to announce their presence any more than necessary. As they gathered their gear, Thomas felt a familiar pressure building behind his eyes. He reached up to adjust the neural stabilizer, silently willing it to keep his mind clear for what lay ahead. "The bank should be at the center of town," Thomas said, pointing down the dusty main street, assuming it's still standing. They moved cautiously, Sarah's team taking point and watching for any signs of danger. The only sounds were the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel and the eerie whistle of wind through the abandoned buildings. As they approached the center of town, Thomas felt a wave of déjà vu wash over him. The bank stood before them, its once grand facade now weather-beaten and crumbling, but it was still there, still holding the secret he had entrusted to it years ago. "This is it," he murmured, approaching the boarded-up entrance. Sarah held up a hand, signaling the team to stop. "Wait, this is too easy. No guards, no security systems, it doesn't feel right." Thomas nodded, understanding her caution. "The prototype itself isn't valuable to anyone but us, and no one knew I hid it here. But you're right, we should be careful." With practiced efficiency, Sarah's team secured the perimeter, while she and Thomas worked on opening the bank's door. It took some effort, but eventually they managed to pry it open, revealing a dark interior thick with dust and cobwebs. As they stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, Thomas felt a rush of memories. He had been so desperate when he came here last, so determined to keep the prototype out of the wrong hands. Had he ever truly believed he would be back to retrieve it? "The vault should be in the back," he said, leading the way through the abandoned lobby. They found the vault door exactly where Thomas remembered it. It was a massive thing, built to withstand any attempt at forced entry, but Thomas knew its secret. "The combination," he muttered, reaching out to touch the dial. It's... Panic gripped him as he realized he couldn't remember the numbers. The fog of his condition descended, obscuring the crucial information. "Thomas?" Eleanor's voice was gentle, concerned. "It's okay. Take your time." He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, willing his fractured mind to cooperate. And then, like a ray of sunlight breaking through clouds, it came to him. 11/9/47, he said, his voice stronger now. My father's birthday. With trembling hands, he input the combination. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the vault door swung open. Inside, bathed in the beams of their flashlights, sat a single metal case. Thomas approached it reverently, feeling the weight of years and expectations pressing down on him. As he reached for the case, a noise from outside froze them all in place. The unmistakable sound of vehicles approaching. We've got company, Sarah hissed, already moving towards the entrance. Multiple vehicles coming in fast. Thomas's heart raced. Had they been followed? Was it Neuralink, the Cognition Collective, or something else entirely? We need to move, Sarah ordered. Grab the prototype and let's go. We'll take the back exit. But as they turned to leave, a voice called out from the street, amplified by a megaphone. A voice Thomas knew all too well. Thomas, I know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like civilized people. Victor Reeves had found them. Thomas exchanged a look with Eleanor and Sarah. They were trapped, caught between the vault and whatever forces Victor had brought with him. Options? Thomas asked, his mind racing. Sarah's face was grim. We fight our way out if we have to. But first, we need to secure that prototype. Whatever's on it, we can't let it fall into their hands. Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. As she outlined her plan, Thomas felt a mix of admiration and fear. It was dangerous, potentially disastrous, but it might just work. Outside, Victor's voice called out again. You have 1 minute, Thomas, then we're coming in. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Thomas took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He looked at the prototype in his hands, then at his companions, Eleanor with her unwavering loyalty, Sarah with her fierce determination, and the memory of Michael, risking everything to warn them. All right, he said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. Let's do this. As they put Eleanor's plan into motion, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that everything, their lives, the future of human consciousness, the fate of the world, hinged on what would happen in the next few minutes. The ghosts of Ghost Ridge seemed to watch in silent anticipation as the final act of this drama began to unfold. Whatever the outcome, Thomas knew that nothing would ever be the same again. With one last look at the prototype that had brought them to this moment, Thomas Hartley prepared to face his old friend and enemy. The next move in this deadly game was theirs, and he was determined to make it count. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across Ghost Ridge as Thomas stepped out of the bank. Dust swirled around his feet, stirred by a hot, dry wind that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. He clutched the metal case containing the prototype close to his chest, its weight a reminder of everything at stake. Victor Reeves stood in the center of the street, flanked by a group of armed men. His crisp suit looked oddly out of place in the desolate surroundings, a symbol of the modern world intruding on this relic of the past. Thomas, Victor called out, a smile playing on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. It's good to see you, old friend. I must say, you've led us on quite a chase. Thomas took a few more steps forward, painfully aware of how exposed he was. He could feel Sarah and her team watching from the shadows of the bank, ready to act if needed. Eleanor was somewhere behind him, her part in their desperate plan yet to unfold. Victor, Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. I wish I could say the same. What do you want? Victor's smile widened, becoming almost predatory. Oh, I think you know exactly what I want, Thomas. The prototype, of course, and everything on it. Did you really think we wouldn't figure out your little hide-and-seek game? Thomas's grip on the case tightened. If you know what's on it, then you know why I can't let you have it. The Cognition Collective, Victor. Really? I thought even you had limits. A flicker of surprise crossed Victor's face before he schooled his features back into a mask of calm. So, Michael managed to get a message to you after all. Clever boy. It's almost a shame we'll have to deal with him once this is over. Anger flared in Thomas's chest. You won't touch him. This ends here, Victor. Whatever the collective is planning, whatever you think you're going to gain from all this, it's over. Victor laughed, the sound echoing off the abandoned buildings. Over? Oh, Thomas, it's only just beginning. The prototype, if you please. Don't make this any harder than it needs to be. Thomas took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. He glanced back at the bank, giving an almost imperceptible nod. You want it? Thomas said, his voice rising. Come and get it. In one fluid motion, he turned and tossed the case high into the air, back towards the bank. Victor's men raised their weapons, but before they could fire, several things happened at once. Eleanor burst out of a side alley, another identical case in her hands. She sprinted in the opposite direction from Thomas, drawing the attention of half of Victor's team. At the same moment, Sarah and her operatives emerged from their hiding spots, laying down covering fire with non-lethal rounds, creating chaos and confusion. Thomas used the distraction to dive for cover behind an old water trough, his heart pounding in his ears. The neural stabilizer hummed, fighting to keep his mind clear amidst the adrenaline and fear. Victor's voice rose above the commotion. Get those cases, now! Thomas peered out from his hiding spot, watching as Victor's men split up, some chasing after Eleanor, while others converged on the bank where the first case had landed. Victor himself stood in the center of it all, barking orders and looking increasingly frustrated. Suddenly a hand grabbed Thomas's shoulder. He spun around, ready to defend himself, only to find Sarah crouched beside him. Nice throw, she said with a grim smile. Think they bought it? Thomas nodded. Let's hope so. Did you get the real prototype secured? Sarah patted a backpack she was wearing. Safe and sound. Your little magic trick with the 2 cases was inspired. Now we just need to get out of here in one piece. A burst of gunfire nearby reminded them of the precarious situation they were in. Eleanor? Thomas asked, worry creeping into his voice. She's okay, Sarah assured him. My team is covering her exit. She'll meet us at the rendezvous point. Thomas allowed himself a moment of relief before focusing on their next move. So, what's the plan? Sarah's eyes gleamed with determination. We fight our way out. There's an old mine shaft at the edge of town. It connects to a network of tunnels that'll lead us away from here. Think you're up for a little spelunking, old man? Despite the gravity of the situation, Thomas couldn't help but smile. Lead the way, Agent Reeves. They moved quickly from cover to cover, using the confusion of the ongoing fight to their advantage. Thomas could hear Victor shouting in frustration as his men reported that both cases they'd recovered were empty, decoys planted as part of their plan. As they neared the edge of town, a figure stepped out from behind a building, blocking their path. Michael Chen stood before them, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Michael, Thomas breathed, relief and wariness warring within him. Dad, Michael replied, his voice strained. I'm sorry, but I can't let you leave with that prototype. Sarah raised her weapon, but Thomas put a hand on her arm, stepping forward. Michael, listen to me. We know about the collective. We're trying to stop them. Whatever they've told you, whatever they've promised, it's not worth it. Michael's composure cracked, a hint of the young man Thomas remembered shining through. You don't understand. They have contingencies, fail-safes. If I don't bring them that prototype, they'll... He trailed off, his eyes haunted. Thomas's heart ached for his protégé, trapped in a web of lies and coercion. Then come with us, Thomas said, extending his hand. We'll face them together. You, me, your mother, just like old times. For a moment Michael hesitated, years of doubt and fear warring on his face. Then, slowly, he reached out and took Thomas's hand. Okay, he whispered. Let's end this. As they turned to leave, a slow clapping sound echoed through the street. Victor emerged from the shadows, his face twisted with rage and grudging admiration. Bravo, Thomas. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, but did you really think it would be that easy? Behind Victor, a group of black-clad figures emerged, their faces obscured by high-tech visors. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine as he realized they were facing members of the Cognition Collective itself. It's time you learned the truth, Thomas, Victor said, his voice cold. About Neuralink, about the collective, about the very nature of consciousness itself. As the shadowy figures advanced, Thomas, Sarah, and Michael stood their ground. Whatever revelations awaited them, whatever challenges they would face, they would face them together. The dusty streets of Ghost Ridge were about to bear witness to a confrontation that would shape the future of humanity. And Thomas Hartley, despite the fear and uncertainty coursing through him, had never felt more ready for a fight in his life. The final battle for the soul of Neuralink, and perhaps the soul of humanity itself, was about to begin. The air in Ghost Ridge grew thick with tension as Thomas, Sarah, and Michael faced off against Victor and the enigmatic figures of the Cognition Collective. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty street, turning the abandoned town into a surreal battlefield of light and darkness. Thomas's mind raced, assessing their options. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had the prototype and, more importantly, they had each other. He glanced at Michael, seeing the conflict etched on his protégé's face. Whatever happened next, Thomas knew it would shape the course of their future. "The truth, Victor," Thomas called out, buying time as he formulated a plan. "I'm all ears. Why don't you tell us what this is really all about?" Victor's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, Thomas, always the scientist, always seeking understanding. Very well, let me illuminate you." He gestured to the black-clad figures behind him. "The Cognition Collective isn't just an organization, Thomas. It's the next step in human evolution. We're on the brink of a revolution in consciousness, and your work, our work, is the key to unlocking it." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about? Imagine a world where human minds are interconnected, where knowledge and experiences can be shared instantaneously." Victor continued, his eyes gleaming with fervor. "No more barriers, no more limitations. A collective consciousness that spans the globe." Michael stepped forward, his voice tight with emotion. "But at what cost, Victor? The human mind isn't meant to be networked like that. The psychological trauma, the loss of individuality. Sacrifices must be made for progress," Victor snapped. "You of all people should understand that, Michael. Or have you forgotten everything we showed you?" Thomas's mind whirled with the implications. He had always envisioned Neuralink as a tool to enhance human cognition, to help those with neurological disorders. But this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. "And the prototype?" Thomas asked, dreading the answer. Victor's smile widened. "The missing piece of the puzzle. Your original design contained something you didn't even realize, a method for seamlessly integrating multiple consciousness streams. With it, we can finally achieve true cognitive singularity." Sarah tensed beside Thomas, her hand inching towards her weapon. "You're insane," she hissed. "You're talking about the end of human individuality as we know it. We're talking about the next stage of human existence," one of the collective members spoke, their voice distorted by their visor. "A world without conflict, without misunderstanding. Perfect harmony." Thomas shook his head, disgust and horror warring within him. "It's not harmony if it's forced. What you're proposing, it's not evolution, it's subjugation." Victor's face hardened. "I had hoped you would understand, Thomas, that you would see the beauty of what we're trying to achieve. But I see now that was wishful thinking. The prototype, if you please. Don't make this any harder than it needs to be." Thomas stood his ground, acutely aware of Sarah and Michael flanking him. "You know I can't do that, Victor. Whatever you and the collective are planning, it ends here." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, with a resigned sigh, Victor nodded to the collective members. "Take them." What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. The collective advanced, revealing advanced weaponry that crackled with electric energy. Sarah sprang into action, her combat training evident as she engaged the nearest opponents. Michael, to Thomas's surprise and relief, stood with them, using his inside knowledge of the collective's tactics to anticipate their moves. Thomas found himself face to face with Victor, years of friendship and betrayal culminating in this moment. "It doesn't have to be this way," Thomas pleaded, even as he dodged a swing from his former friend. "It's the only way, Thomas," Victor growled. "The world is chaos. We're offering order." As they grappled, Thomas felt the neural stabilizer in his ear begin to buzz erratically. The strain of the fight, the emotional turmoil, it was all becoming too much. He could feel his grasp on reality starting to slip. Just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, a familiar voice rang out across the battlefield. "Thomas, catch!" Eleanor emerged from a nearby building, tossing something through the air. Thomas caught it instinctively. the real prototype which Sarah had entrusted to Eleanor for safekeeping. Time seemed to slow as Thomas held the device that had started it all. In that moment of clarity, he knew what he had to do. "Michael," he called out, "the initialization sequence, do you remember?" Understanding dawned on Michael's face. Together, they began to input a complex series of commands into the prototype. It was a failsafe Thomas had built into the original design, one he had almost forgotten. Victor's eyes widened in realization. "Stop them!" he roared, but it was too late. The prototype emitted a high-pitched whine, building in intensity. Suddenly, every piece of advanced tech the collective was using, their weapons, their visors, even Victor's neural implants, began to short-circuit. In the chaos that followed, Sarah and her team seized the advantage, quickly subduing the now vulnerable collective members. As the dust settled, Thomas found himself standing over a defeated Victor. His old friend looked up at him, a mix of anger and grudging respect in his eyes. "You've ruined everything," Victor spat. Thomas shook his head sadly. "No, Victor. We've saved everything." As Sarah's team rounded up the collective members and secured the area, Thomas felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the full weight of what they'd just experienced began to sink in. Eleanor rushed to embrace both Thomas and Michael, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." But even as he returned the embrace, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. They had won the battle, but the war for the future of human consciousness was far from over. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Thomas Hartley looked out over the ghost town that had become the battleground for humanity's future. They had faced their ghosts, both literal and figurative, and emerged victorious. But as he watched Sarah coordinating with her team, as he saw the mixture of relief and uncertainty on Michael's face, as he felt the weight of the prototype in his hands, Thomas knew their journey was not yet complete. The truth had been revealed, but its echoes would resonate far beyond the dusty streets of Ghost Ridge. As night fell on their battlefield, Thomas steeled himself for the challenges that still lay ahead. The fight for the soul of Neuralink and the very nature of human consciousness was only just beginning. The dawn broke over Ghost Ridge, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. The abandoned town, which had stood silent for so long, now buzzed with activity, as government agents swarmed the area, securing evidence and detaining members of the Cognition Collective. Thomas sat on the steps of the old bank, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. The events of the previous night played on repeat in his mind, each replay bringing new questions and realizations. Beside him, Eleanor dozed fitfully, her head resting on his shoulder. Michael paced nearby, his nervous energy a stark contrast to their stillness. Sarah approached, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night. "We've got them all in custody," she reported, her voice low, "including Victor. But Thomas, this is bigger than we thought. The collective had ties to governments, major corporations. This isn't over." Thomas nodded wearily. "I know, but at least we've bought ourselves some time." He glanced at the prototype, now secured in a high-tech containment unit. "What happens to that now?" Sarah's expression turned grim. "It's being taken to a secure facility for analysis." "Thomas, I won't lie to you. There are people in high places who are very interested in this technology. We've stopped the collective, but there will be others who might try to exploit it." "Then we destroy it," Michael interjected, stopping his pacing to face them. "It's too dangerous to exist." Thomas felt a pang in his chest at the thought. The prototype represented years of work, the culmination of his life's research. But Michael was right. The risks were too great. "No," Thomas said slowly, an idea forming. "We don't destroy it. We complete it." Eleanor stirred beside him, blinking in confusion. "Complete it? Thomas, what do you mean?" Thomas stood, energy returning to him as he spoke. The collective wanted to use the technology to control people, to create a hive mind, but that was never its purpose. We go back to the original goal, helping people, enhancing cognition in a way that respects individual autonomy. Michael's eyes widened in understanding. A neural interface that enhances rather than subsumes. "Dad, that's brilliant. But can it be done?" Thomas smiled, feeling more like his old self than he had in months. With the right team, anything's possible, and I think we have the right team right here. Sarah looked skeptical. It's a noble goal, Thomas, but you're talking about redeveloping incredibly sensitive technology. The powers that be might not allow it. Then we don't give them a choice, Thomas said firmly. We go public. We tell the world what happened here, what the collective was planning. We make the development process transparent, get ethical oversight from day one. Eleanor stood, placing a hand on Thomas's arm. It's risky, Thomas. We'll be making ourselves targets. Thomas covered her hand with his own. We already are targets, Eleanor. At least this way we're fighting for something worthwhile. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they hashed out the beginnings of a plan. It wouldn't be easy. They faced opposition from those who feared the technology and those who wanted to control it. But for the first time in a long time, Thomas felt a sense of true purpose. Later that day, as they prepared to leave Ghost Ridge, Thomas found himself standing once again in front of the old bank vault. The empty case that had once held the prototype lay discarded on the floor. "Penny for your thoughts?" Michael's voice came from behind him. Thomas turned to face his protégé, seeing the mixture of guilt and hope in the young man's eyes. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, and how far we still have to go." Michael nodded, his expression somber. "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything. I thought I was protecting you, protecting everyone, by infiltrating the collective. I never imagined it would go this far." Thomas placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "You did what you thought was right. That's all any of us can do. The question is, what do we do now?" Michael's eyes lit up with a familiar determination. "We do better. We take this second chance, and we make something good out of it. Together." As they walked out of the bank, Thomas felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He stumbled, catching himself on the doorframe. "Dad?" Michael's voice was laced with concern. Thomas waved him off, straightening up. "I'm all right, just tired, I think." But even as he said it, Thomas knew it wasn't just fatigue. His condition was progressing, the neural stabilizer only doing so much to hold back the tide. He had been so caught up in the immediate crisis that he had almost forgotten about his own ticking clock. As they joined the others by the vehicles, Thomas made a silent vow. Whatever time he had left, he would use it to set things right, to ensure that the legacy of Neuralink was one of hope and progress, not fear and control. The convoy pulled out of Ghost Ridge, leaving the ghost town to its solitude once more. But as they drove away, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were leaving something behind. Perhaps the ghosts of their past selves, the people they had been before this all began. Issa's face flashed in his mind, reminding him of the promise he had made. There was still so much to do, so many lives hanging in the balance. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges both known and unknown. But as Thomas looked at the faces around him, Eleanor's unwavering support, Michael's renewed purpose, Sarah's stalwart determination, he felt a surge of hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun was high in the sky now, burning away the last traces of morning mist. As Ghost Ridge faded into the distance behind them, Thomas Hartley turned his gaze to the horizon, ready to write the next chapter in their ongoing story. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning, and Thomas was determined to see it through, for as long as his mind would allow. The weeks following the showdown at Ghost Ridge passed in a whirlwind of activity. Thomas, Eleanor, Michael and Sarah found themselves at the center of a storm of media attention, government inquiries, and ethical debates. The revelation of the Cognition Collective's existence and their plans had sent shockwaves through the scientific community and beyond. Thomas sat in a makeshift lab, surrounded by whiteboards covered in complex equations and diagrams. The prototype sat on a nearby workbench, simultaneously a beacon of hope and a reminder of the dangers they faced. He rubbed his temples, fighting back another wave of fatigue. "You should rest," Eleanor's voice came from the doorway. She entered, carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. "You've been at this for hours." Thomas offered a weak smile. "There's so much to do, Eleanor. We're racing against time in more ways than one." She set the tray down and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I know, but you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." As if on cue, Michael burst into the room, his face alight with excitement. "Dad, I think I've cracked it." The synaptic relay issue we've been struggling with, I think I found a solution. Thomas felt a surge of pride mixed with a tinge of sadness. Michael's brilliance was undeniable, and Thomas couldn't help but wonder how much longer he'd be able to keep up with his protégé's insights. "Show me," Thomas said, pushing aside his fatigue. As Michael excitedly explained his breakthrough, drawing rapid-fire diagrams on a nearby whiteboard, Sarah entered the lab. Her expression was serious, immediately catching Thomas's attention. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "The Senate Committee on Technology and Ethics is pushing for immediate cessation of all work on the neural interface. They're citing the potential dangers revealed by the Cognition Collective incident." Thomas felt his heart sink. They had known this was a possibility, but he had hoped they'd have more time. "When?" "The hearing is scheduled for next week," Sarah replied. "Thomas, they're going to try to shut us down completely. We need to be prepared." Eleanor stepped forward, her face set with determination. "Then we'll be prepared. We'll present our case, show them the potential benefits of the technology when used ethically." Michael nodded enthusiastically. "We can demonstrate the fail-safes we've built in, the protocols to ensure individual autonomy is preserved." Thomas listened to their plans, a mixture of pride and concern washing over him. They were right, of course. They had to fight this. But as another wave of dizziness hit him, he couldn't shake the nagging fear that he might not be able to see this through to the end. "Thomas?" Eleanor's voice cut through his thoughts. "What do you think?" He blinked, focusing on the present. "You're right. We fight. But we need to be smart about this. Sarah, can you get us the list of committee members? We need to know who we're dealing with." As they began to strategize for the upcoming hearing, Thomas's mind drifted to Isa. In all the chaos of the past weeks, he had made sure she was safe, setting her up with a trust fund and ensuring Mrs. Rossi had all the resources she needed to care for the girl. But he hadn't seen her, hadn't been able to explain everything that had happened. "I need to see Isa," Thomas said suddenly, interrupting the ongoing discussion. The others fell silent, exchanging glances. It was Eleanor who spoke first. "Of course, we can arrange it. But Thomas, are you sure now is the right time? With everything that's happening?" Thomas stood, his resolve strengthening. Now is exactly the right time. "Before this hearing, before we potentially lose everything we've worked for, I made her a promise and I intend to keep it." Sarah nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I'll make the arrangements. We can have her brought here securely." As the others continued their planning, Thomas walked to the window, looking out at the secure facility that had become their base of operations. So much had changed in such a short time. The world now knew about the potential of neural interface technology, for better or worse. And here they were, racing against time to ensure it was used for good. The next day, Thomas found himself sitting in a comfortable lounge area, waiting nervously. When the door opened and Isa stepped in, his heart leapt. She looked healthier, happier, but there was a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Hartley," she said hesitantly. Thomas smiled, fighting back tears. "Hello, Isa. It's so good to see you." She rushed forward then, throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. "I was so worried, Mrs. Rossi said you were okay, but then I saw all that stuff on the news, and I didn't know what to think." Thomas held her tight, marveling at the strength of this young girl who had set everything in motion. "I'm okay, Isa, and I'm so sorry I couldn't come see you sooner. There's been a lot happening." As they sat together, Thomas carefully explained everything that had transpired, simplifying the complex events as best he could for her young mind. Isa listened with wide-eyed attention, occasionally asking surprisingly insightful questions. "So you're going to make the brain-computer thing work the right way now?" she asked when he had finished. Thomas nodded. "We're trying to, but it's not going to be easy. There are people who are scared of the technology, and for good reason." Isa's brow furrowed in thought. "But you'll do it, right? You'll make it work. You always figure things out." Her simple faith in him brought a lump to Thomas's throat. "I'm going to try my very best, Isa. I promise you that." As their visit came to an end, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. Isa's unwavering belief in him, her innocence in the face of all the complexity and danger they had faced, it reminded him of why they were fighting so hard. Rejoining the others, Thomas found them still deep in preparation for the upcoming hearing. But now he approached their task with fresh energy and determination. "All right," he said, drawing their attention. "Let's make sure we get this right. Not just for us, but for everyone who could benefit from this technology. For the future we know is possible." As they dove back into their work, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But alongside it was a burning hope. A hope for a future where technology could truly enhance human potential, ethically and safely. The hearing loomed before them, a daunting challenge that could determine the fate of their work and possibly the future of human cognitive enhancement. But Thomas Hartley was ready to face it head-on, surrounded by the brilliant minds and loyal hearts that had brought them this far. Whatever the outcome, he knew that their journey was far from over. The new horizon they sought was just beginning to take shape, and Thomas was determined to see it realized for Issa, for all of them, and for the betterment of humanity. The morning of the Senate hearing dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. Thomas stood before a mirror in the hotel suite, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. The face that looked back at him seemed older, more weathered than he remembered. The neural stabilizer hummed softly in his ear, a constant reminder of the personal stakes involved. Eleanor appeared behind him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're ready for this, Thomas, we all are." He nodded, trying to muster a smile. "I know, it's just, there's so much riding on this. If we can't convince them—" "We will," Michael chimed in, entering the room with a stack of papers. "The evidence is on our side. We just need to make them see it." Sarah was the last to join them, her face set in determined lines. "The car's ready. It's time." As they made their way to the Capitol, Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. How many times had he testified before committees like this in his previous life as the CEO of Neuralink? But this time was different. This time, the fate of not just a company but potentially all of humanity hung in the balance. The hearing room was packed when they arrived. Journalists, scientists, and curious onlookers filled every available seat. At the front, the members of the Senate Committee on Technology and Ethics sat in imposing rows, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. As Thomas took his seat at the witness table, he scanned the room. His heart skipped a beat when he spotted a familiar face in the back, Victor Reeves, flanked by two guards. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Thomas was surprised to see not anger or defiance in Victor's gaze, but something that looked almost like regret. The committee chairman, a stern-faced woman named Senator Evelyn Harper, called the hearing to order. "Dr. Hartley," she began, her voice echoing in the suddenly silent room, "you are here today to argue for the continuation of research into neural interface technology, despite the recent revelations about its potential for misuse. Why should we not simply ban this technology outright?" Thomas leaned forward, his voice steady as he began the speech they had carefully prepared. "Senator, distinguished committee members, I understand your concerns. The events surrounding the Cognition Collective have shown us the dangers of this technology when pursued without ethical oversight. But I am here today to argue that those same events demonstrate precisely why we must continue this research." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "The genie is out of the bottle. We cannot uninvent this technology. But we can ensure that its development proceeds in an ethical, transparent manner, with the goal of enhancing human life rather than controlling it." For the next hour, Thomas laid out their case. He explained the potential medical applications, helping those with neurological disorders, restoring mobility to the paralyzed. He detailed the safeguards they had developed to protect individual autonomy and prevent the kind of mass manipulation the collective had envisioned. Michael and Eleanor took turns presenting technical data and ethical frameworks. Sarah provided insights into the national security implications, both the risks of allowing the technology to develop in the shadows and the potential benefits of controlled, ethical advancement. As the questioning began, Thomas felt his energy beginning to flag. The neural stabilizer worked overtime, fighting to keep his thoughts clear as the senators peppered them with probing, often skeptical questions. It was during a particularly grueling line of questioning about the potential for government overreach that Thomas felt it, the beginning of an episode. His vision blurred slightly, and he could feel the familiar fog creeping in at the edges of his mind. "Dr. Hartley." Senator Harper's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right?" Thomas blinked hard, fighting to stay present. This was the moment of truth. He had known this might happen, had prepared for it. But now, faced with the reality, he felt a moment of panic. Then he felt a hand on his arm. Michael had moved closer, offering silent support. Thomas took a deep breath and made a decision. "Senator Harper, distinguished committee members," he said, his voice stronger than he felt, "I apologize. What you're witnessing is one of the reasons I am so passionate about this research." A murmur ran through the crowd as Thomas continued. "I have early-onset Alzheimer's disease. The neural stabilizer I'm wearing, a precursor to the technology we're discussing, is the only thing allowing me to be here today, to continue this vital work." The room fell silent as Thomas went on, explaining his condition, the progress they had made, and the potential for neural interface technology to help millions suffering from neurological disorders. As he spoke, Thomas could see the faces of the committee members changing. The skepticism was still there, but now mixed with compassion and a growing understanding of the stakes involved. When Thomas finished, there was a moment of profound silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, Victor Reeves stood up in the back of the room. "If I may, Senator," he called out, his voice carrying clearly, "I would like to make a statement." After a moment of confusion and hurried whispers, Senator Harper nodded. "Very well, Mr. Reeves, but keep it brief." Victor stepped forward, his face a mask of solemnity. "I have been on the other side of this issue. I have seen firsthand the potential for this technology to be misused, but I have also seen, through Dr. Hartley and his team, its potential for good. I was wrong in my actions, and I urge this committee not to make the same mistake. This research must continue, but it must do so in the light, with full transparency and ethical oversight." As Victor was led back to his seat, the room erupted in a buzz of conversation. Thomas exchanged glances with his team, a mix of shock and cautious hope on their faces. Senator Harper called for order, her expression thoughtful. "Dr. Hartley, in light of your testimony and recent developments, this committee will need time to deliberate. We will reconvene tomorrow for our decision." As they left the hearing room, surrounded by a flurry of reporters and onlookers, Thomas felt a glimmer of hope. They had laid all their cards on the table, had spoken from the heart about the potential of this technology to change lives for the better. Back in their hotel suite, as they dissected every moment of the hearing, Thomas allowed himself a small smile. Whatever tomorrow brought, they had fought with everything they had, and in doing so, they had taken the first step towards a future where technology and ethics could work hand in hand for the betterment of humanity. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Thomas Hartley felt the scales tipping in their favor. As night fell over the city, he looked out at the lights of Washington, D.C., his mind already racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. The morning of the committee's decision broke with a nervous energy that seemed to permeate the entire city. Thomas woke early, his sleep having been fitful and filled with fragmented dreams of neural pathways and Senate chambers. As he sat on the edge of his bed, he felt the weight of the day ahead pressing down on him. A soft knock on the door broke through his reverie. "Thomas?" Eleanor's voice called gently. "Are you up?" "Come in," he responded, attempting to inject some strength into his voice. Eleanor entered, carrying a tray with breakfast and his morning medication. Her face was a mixture of concern and determination. "How are you feeling?" Thomas managed a weak smile. "As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose. Any word from Sarah?" Eleanor shook her head as she set the tray down. "Not yet. She's been at the Capitol since dawn, trying to gauge the committee's mood. Michael's with her." As Thomas took his medication, including an adjustment to his neural stabilizer, he couldn't help but marvel at the team they had become, each of them bringing their unique strengths to bear in this fight for the future of neural interface technology. "We should head over soon," Thomas said, forcing himself to eat despite his churning stomach. "I want to be there early, just in case." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the stakes. If the committee decided against them, years of work and the potential to help millions would be lost. The ride to the capital was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached, Thomas was struck by the crowd gathered outside. Supporters and protesters alike held signs, their voices creating a cacophony of hope and fear. "Looks like we've started quite the debate," Eleanor murmured, her eyes scanning the crowd. Thomas nodded. "Good. Whatever happens today, at least people are talking about it." Thinking about the implications, they made their way through security and into the hearing room, which was already buzzing with anticipation. Sarah and Michael were waiting for them, their faces a mix of tension and cautious optimism. "Any news?" Thomas asked as they took their seats. Sarah shook her head. "They've played this close to the chest. But the fact that Victor's testimony wasn't immediately dismissed, that's got to count for something." Before they could discuss further, the room fell silent as the committee members filed in. Senator Harper took her seat at the center, her face unreadable as she called the session to order. After careful consideration of the testimony presented yesterday and lengthy deliberations, this committee is ready to present its recommendation regarding the future of neural interface technology research, Senator Harper began, her voice echoing in the silent chamber. Thomas felt his heart racing, the neural stabilizer working overtime to keep his anxiety in check. He felt Eleanor's hand slip into his, a silent gesture of support. "It is the opinion of this committee," Senator Harper continued, "that the potential benefits of this technology, when developed under strict ethical guidelines and with full transparency, outweigh the potential risks of halting all research." A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a mix of cheers and murmurs of dissent. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him, so powerful he thought he might collapse. But Senator Harper wasn't finished. "However," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "we cannot in good conscience allow this research to continue without significant oversight. Therefore, we are recommending the establishment of a new regulatory body, the Neural Technology Ethics Commission. This commission will work closely with Dr. Hartley's team and any other researchers in the field to ensure that all development adheres to the strictest ethical standards." As Senator Harper outlined the details of their decision, Thomas exchanged glances with his team. It wasn't an unequivocal victory, but it was far better than they had dared to hope for. They would be able to continue their work, to push forward with their vision of using this technology to help people. The rest of the session passed in a blur of details and procedural matters. As they finally left the hearing room, Thomas felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "We did it," Michael said, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." Sarah nodded, a rare smile breaking through her usually serious demeanor. "It's a start, a good one, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us." As they made their way through the Capitol, surrounded by a flurry of reporters and well-wishers, Thomas spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Victor Reeves stood at the edge of the throng, flanked by his guards. Their eyes met, and Victor gave a small nod of acknowledgement before being led away. Outside, the bright midday sun seemed to mirror the lightness Thomas felt in his heart. As they faced the bank of cameras and microphones, ready to make their first statement as the newly sanctioned research team, Thomas felt a surge of hope for the future. "Dr. Hartley," one reporter called out, "what's your response to the committee's decision?" Thomas took a deep breath, looking at each member of his team before turning back to the cameras. "We are grateful for the committee's trust and understanding of the potential this technology holds. But more than that, we are committed to proving that their trust is well placed. Our work has always been about improving lives, about pushing the boundaries of what's possible in ethical, transparent ways. That commitment has not and will not waver." As he continued to answer questions, outlining their plans and addressing concerns, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and intense scrutiny. But they had been given a chance to shape the future of human cognition in a way that respected individual autonomy while pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Later that evening, as they celebrated in their hotel suite, Thomas found a quiet moment to slip away to the balcony. Looking out over the city, he thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. From his days as a disgraced CEO, through the dark times of his diagnosis, to the unexpected alliance with Issa that had set everything in motion, he thought about the battles yet to come, not just in the lab or the boardroom, but in his own mind as he raced against the progression of his condition. But for the first time in a long time, Thomas Hartley felt truly hopeful. As he heard the others calling for him to rejoin the celebration, Thomas smiled. Whatever the future held, he knew they would face it together. The tide had turned in their favor, and with it came the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. With one last look at the city skyline, Thomas turned back to join his team, his family. The next chapter of their journey was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead them. 1 year had passed since the fateful Senate hearing, and the world of neural interface technology had undergone a dramatic transformation. The old Neuralink facility, once a symbol of corporate greed and ethical missteps, had been repurposed into the headquarters of the Neural Technology Ethics Commission, NTSC. Today, it bustled with activity as scientists, ethicists, and government officials gathered for a landmark demonstration. Thomas Hartley stood at the podium, his hands steady as he adjusted the microphone. The neural stabilizer hummed softly in his ear, a constant reminder of how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Behind him, Eleanor, Michael, and Sarah sat in a row, their faces a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas began, his voice strong and clear, "thank you for joining us on this historic day. 1 year ago, we stood before the Senate and made a promise to develop neural interface technology in an ethical, transparent manner for the betterment of humanity. Today, we take the first major step in fulfilling that promise." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the audience. Journalists leaned forward, their cameras at the ready. In the front row, he spotted Senator Harper, her expression cautiously optimistic. And there near the back sat Issa and Mrs. Rossi, the young girl's eyes shining with excitement. "What you're about to witness is not just a technological breakthrough," Thomas continued, "but a new paradigm in how we approach the merger of human cognition and artificial assistance. Our team has developed a neural interface that enhances cognitive function without compromising individual autonomy or privacy." With a nod to Michael, a large screen behind them came to life, displaying a 3D model of the human brain crisscrossed with glowing neural pathways. "This interface," Thomas explained, gesturing to the display, "works in harmony with the brain's natural processes. It doesn't override or control, it suggests and supports. Imagine having instant access to any information you've ever learned, or being able to process complex problems with unprecedented speed and clarity. For those suffering from neurological disorders, it offers the possibility of regaining lost functions and improving quality of life." As Thomas delved into the technical specifics, he could see the audience leaning in, their expressions changing from skepticism to wonder. Even the most hardened critics seemed captivated by the potential applications he described. "But technology alone is not enough," Thomas said, his tone growing serious. "That's why, in partnership with NTech, we've developed a comprehensive ethical framework to govern the development and use of this technology. Transparency, informed consent, and the preservation of human agency are at the core of everything we do." He went on to outline the safeguards they had put in place, from unhackable encryption to a user's absolute control over their data and the ability to disconnect at any time. As he spoke, Thomas could feel a sense of pride swelling in his chest. This was what they had fought for, what they had sacrificed so much to achieve. "And now," Thomas said, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice, "we'd like to give you a demonstration of what this technology can do." He turned, gesturing to Eleanor, who stood and made her way to the podium. As she took her place beside him, Thomas felt a surge of emotion. They had been through so much together, and here they were on the cusp of changing the world. "Dr. Chen will be using our neural interface to solve a series of complex mathematical problems," Thomas explained. "What you're about to see is not just raw computing power, but a true symbiosis of human intuition and technological assistance." As Eleanor began the demonstration, the audience watched in awe. Problems that would take even the most brilliant mathematicians hours to solve were being unraveled in minutes. But it wasn't just the speed that was impressive. It was the creative leaps, the intuitive connections that only a human mind could make. When the demonstration concluded, the room erupted in applause. Thomas could see tears in Eleanor's eyes as she embraced Michael, both of them overwhelmed by the success of their years of hard work. As the applause died down, Thomas returned to the podium for one final announcement. What you've seen today is just the beginning. We're already exploring applications in medical diagnosis, scientific research, and education. But we can't do it alone. That's why we're launching the Neural Interface Initiative, a global open-source project inviting scientists, ethicists, and thinkers from all disciplines to help shape the future of this technology. The announcement was met with another round of enthusiastic applause. As Thomas fielded questions from the audience, he could see the excitement building. This wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was the dawn of a new era in human potential. As the event wound down and people began to file out, Thomas felt a small hand tugging at his sleeve. He turned to find Isa standing there, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mr. Hartley," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Does this mean you're not sick anymore?" Thomas knelt down to her level, his heart swelling with affection for this brave little girl who had set everything in motion. "Not exactly, Isa, but it means we're getting closer to helping people like me and so many others, and it's all thanks to you, you know. You were the one who gave me hope when I needed it most." Isa beamed, throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. As Thomas held her, he caught sight of his team watching them with fond smiles. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them all together. Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, Thomas stood on the balcony of the Enteki building, looking out at the world they were working to change. Eleanor joined him, handing him a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. Thomas clinked his glass against hers, smiling. "And to the road that brought us here." As they stood in comfortable silence, Thomas reflected on the path that lay ahead. There would be challenges, no doubt, ethical dilemmas to navigate, technological hurdles to overcome. His own condition would continue to be a race against time. But for the first time in years, the future seemed bright with possibility. The neural stabilizer hummed softly, a reminder of how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. But Thomas Hartley was ready for whatever came next. With his team by his side and a renewed sense of purpose, he knew that they were on the cusp of something truly revolutionary. As the lights of the city twinkled below, Thomas raised his glass once more. "To the future," he said softly. "May we shape it wisely and well." The journey that had begun in a humble bakery with a little girl's request for help had led them here, to the threshold of a new era in human cognition. And as Thomas Hartley looked out at the world stretching before him, he knew that their greatest adventures were still to come.